Conservative MPs are voting right now on Theresa May's fate as their leader, as she tells them she won't lead them into the next election. Good evening from Westminster. To add political insult to existing political injury, Tory MPs are voting right now on a motion of no confidence in their leader, which, if Theresa May loses, will result in her removal as Prime Minister. This as the United Kingdom is embroiled in a constitutional and political crisis without precedent in modern times. At its heart, whether we leave or remain in the EU. Tonight, we'll be live until we know the outcome of this chapter in this continuing dramatic political breakdown.
I have devoted myself unsparingly to these tasks ever since I became Prime Minister, and I stand ready to finish the job.
We'll be grabbing Conservative MPs as they pass through Central Lobby, having cast their votes in Committee Room 14 just upstairs. Will all of those people who said they would support Theresa May actually put their cross in the right box? Will her pledge not to stand at the next election influence the way they're voting? I just saw a very furtive-looking David Davis walking through. He was on his phone, or at least pretending to be, so we couldn't ask him how he voted.
Good evening from Downing Street, home to Theresa May, but for how much longer? Just before we came on air, she told an emotional meeting of her MPs she wouldn't lead them into the next general election. That may persuade her colleagues to vote for her tonight, but perhaps not for her Brexit deal.
And here in Brussels, they are exasperated and holding their breath, awaiting the outcome of tonight's extraordinary drama, wondering whether Britain will ever be able to escape the Brexit maze, whoever prevails.
Now is supposed to be the day when Theresa May flew to Ireland to beg for life support for her ailing withdrawal agreement. Instead, at just before 8 this morning, it was announced that more than 48 of her MPs had written letters saying they had no confidence in her, triggering an instant make-or-break vote. The trip to Dublin was canned. She made a dramatic speech in Downing Street vowing to fight on, saying Brexit itself was in peril if she lost. Can she survive? Our political editor Gary Gibbon is here. Can she, Gary?
Yes, I think the short answer is that she can survive as Prime Minister indeed. That is the wide expectation, even amongst people who triggered this vote. If you're measuring in the strange arcane traditions of the Tory party, the bangometer, the desk banging that happened when she addressed Tory backbenchers before they started voting, that seemed to be a reasonably good omen. There were some pokey questions in the room, though, and she has had to make a concession. She's turned round and said, and she didn't particularly want to say it, don't worry, I know you don't want me to lead you into the next general election. I won't. Interestingly, Tory MPs didn't completely just take that at face value. They wanted to press a bit. One of them, one of the rebels, who I suspect will probably vote against her tonight, pressed and said, well, what if there's a snap election? You quite sure? Can we just pin you down on this? You're sure you're not going to lead us into a general election? I doubt she particularly enjoyed the pressure there, but it's just possible if she wins reasonably well, it's possible that the discomfort will be on the rebels' side, because it is possible that she could start marginalising them. I'm sure she won't put it this way, but the reason they stayed their hand for so long, talked about triggering this vote of no confidence, but didn't do it again and again and again, and then when they fired the gun the first time, they didn't manage to cross the line and get enough letters, they were holding back because they weren't sure it would work. They wouldn't actually topple her. And if they don't do that, well, is there a chance that her policy pivots away from them and she feels that she can work round them a bit? That is one of the things that is going around at the talk of pro-Remain MPs and even some pro-Remain cabinet ministers.
Any sense of the numbers? Have you had your ear to the door?
I think the sort of numbers that she would like to win by are something like 100 MPs if she can, but if it's lower than that, even I think you can say if it's a lot lower than that, she's still there. One former minister said to me today, if she wins by one, and this is someone who is probably going to vote against her, if she wins by one, that's enough. Because when we're trying to do these normal assessments of what's the grey area, what's the real margin of victory you need, that's because you're worried someone might lose authority. This former minister said, well, she hasn't got any to start with. Here's how the day went here.
Parliament's gates were shut on the Prime Minister. She and her convoy had to take a spin around the block. It's been a day of frenzied tension in Westminster. Brittle language, claim and counterclaim.
I know cabinet ministers who are being telephoned by the Chief Whip and are telling the Chief Whip they will support her, but they're not. I know ministers who are being phoned by whips who are saying they will support her, but they're not.
I think it's reckless, it's disloyal, it will achieve nothing except discrediting our country in the eyes of the wider world.
Conservative MPs don't always do in private at moments like this on a ballot paper what they say they're going to do in public, do they? You'd be surprised if they did.
Tonight will be a secret ballot, and as in any secret ballot, people can carry their secrets with them.
Sir Graham Brady said he'd phoned the Prime Minister last night to tell her that the required 15% of Tory MPs had sent letters demanding a vote of no confidence in her leadership of the party. He said number 10 wanted the vote as soon as possible. As he spoke in Downing Street, the dreaded lectern was in place, now a familiar omen for torrid political days. Theresa May had a warning. Lose her, you might lose Brexit.
The new leader wouldn't have time to renegotiate a withdrawal agreement and get the legislation through Parliament by the 29th of March. So one of their first acts would have to be extending or rescinding Article 50, delaying or even stopping Brexit, when people want us to get on with it.
Inside Parliament, some Tory MPs were pressing the whips to get a promise from Theresa May. If she survived, she would not go on forever.
It's come to something, hasn't it? You're going to support her tonight, and you want colleagues to support her.
Yes.
But you're saying, you as a supporter are saying, yeah, you've got to tell us you're going to go in about 3 months' time.
I don't have to do 3 months, but
maybe 4?
I think it's very important that the Prime Minister signal that she's committed to see through Brexit and withdrawal.
And then go.
And then make clear that that isn't, for her, the platform to go on and fight the next election.
And may I also welcome the honourable gentleman.
In the Commons, Labour MP Steve Pound was speaking just as Theresa May entered to some Tory cheers. Before she got there, a number 10 source had briefed that Mrs May would not be taking the party into the next general election. In the Commons, there was a supportive question from a veteran of Tory wars past.
At a time of grave national crisis on an issue which we all agree of huge importance to future generations, can my right honourable friend think of anything more unhelpful, irrelevant and irresponsible than for the Conservative Party to embark on weeks of a Conservative leadership election?
A new leader to come in, that one of the first things they would have to do would be to either extend Article 50 or rescind Article 50, and that would mean either delaying or stopping Brexit.
Her opponents said Theresa May must win big to have any authority after tonight. Supporters lowered the bar as low as it would go.
I'm a cricketer. I was happy if we won by 1 run.
This isn't cricket, is it?
Well, the rules of cricket have been abandoned, I agree. She's got to
win by a decent margin, hasn't
or
she?
What? Or what?
She's got to keep her opponents down below 100.
But, or what? Because actually they're behaving in an irrational way anyway.
Or so are they going to weakened with no authority and can't carry on?
Well, are they going to? Is that going to become a more difficult situation? Are they going to become more irrational? Are they going to become more rebellious? It's almost impossible for them to do that.
Some of the cabinet ministers turning out to give the Prime Minister on-screen endorsements have only recently been touting their own Plan Bs. Others have been at cabinet pizza evenings, anguishing over the shortfalls of Theresa May's deal.
I think the Prime Minister will ensure that she unites the Conservative Party, and of course we want support from...
How on earth is she going to do that?
She will do that because we will have had a vote.
You're in a civil war.
No, we are going to have a vote tonight.
Give me some evidence of that.
Well, I'm talking about the future. I think that after tonight...
Oh, it's all going to change?
After tonight, people will see that the Prime Minister has won. No. Her authority has been underwritten by a majority vote of Conservative MPs.
They'll roll in behind her and back the deal?
Well, I do believe, actually, yes, that there will be people who will say, look...
They said they'd die in a ditch, some of them, rather than do that.
Well, I think there are all sorts of people who will say all sorts of things.
The leadership contenders the rebels would like to see in the top job aren't to everyone's taste. Some are busy behind the scenes.
One person stopped me the other day in the corridor, sort of put his arm around my shoulder. I haven't spoken to for 9 years. I thought that was slightly coincidental.
Some of your colleagues pushing for this no confidence vote tonight say, if we got our candidate in there, whether it was Boris Johnson, David Davis, whoever it was, people like you would come into line. There'd be nowhere else for you to go. There'd only be a couple of people who'd even consider voting against the government in a vote of no confidence.
Masters of ashes, because it would undoubtedly split the party. Somebody like me wouldn't wish to remain in a party that moves off far to the right.
Amongst those backing the Prime Minister tonight are some Remainers who resigned from the government to vote against Theresa May's deal.
But you're going to vote for her as Prime Minister, to stay as leader of the party tonight?
Well, I will still vote against the deal, but I don't think that changing the Prime Minister necessarily changes the facts.
You must think she's going to change her position, the other side of this vote. Otherwise you wouldn't be backing her.
I think that's the logic of where we end up.
She's going to reach over to the opposition somehow, get some Labour MPs on side, pivot a bit.
I think she will have to come up with an answer that commands cross-party support.
So these Brexiteers are going to end up with something they didn't like, potentially, even more than what they had.
Well, that's. I think we all need to sort of recognise the logic of our position.
In the Commons committee room, where Tory leaders of the past have been felled, the blinds were coming down tonight. There is just under an hour of voting left.
Our political editor Gary Gibbon with that report, and Gary will be back with me for the results earlier on when our special programme continues online. You can watch it at channel4.com/news after 8 o'clock. Now, I want you, please, to come with me to the other side of the House of Commons, the other side of the River Thames, and come to our live camera, which is trained on the windows behind which this great vote is taking place. And the fascinating thing is, when we first started filming, they pulled the blinds down. So though we can't actually see what's going on there, that's the place. Now, joining me is the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. He's with me now. How did you vote this morning?
This evening? Yeah. I've just been in that room. I voted for the Prime Minister, I think.
Just because we can't see inside it, well, what does it consist of? Who's in there?
Well, there's a couple of members of the 1922 committee, senior backbenchers, overseen by Graham Brady, and there's a couple of voting
secret
booths.
Ballot? Can they see what you do?
No, it's a secret ballot. Normal ballot boxes, the same black ballot boxes you get on a normal vote. And everybody had to present photo ID, which is being brought in for general elections as well. And even though we all know each other very well, we all presented our photo ID and went and checked the box.
Now, we know from previous leadership contests, some people lie about how they voted. Could it happen now?
I don't think so.
But they'll know, won't they?
Well, if you're asked what you're going to do, that's what you go and do. And I've voted for the Prime Minister because I think that's the right thing to do, and make sure that she can get on with
What's your sense of numbers now?
Well, I don't know. The truth is, in the discussion beforehand, where the Prime Minister gave a speech to all of the Conservative MPs, she was very warmly received. She was quite emotional. She was quite, because she was talking about how, even though in her heart she may want to, she knows that she can't lead the party into the next general election.
Right, well, that's exactly where I want to pick you up on.
So there was a warm response.
There might be a warm response, but the truth is, you've now got a lame duck Prime Minister if she wins.
Well, we've got, I hope, a Prime Minister who's won a majority, and I hope a big majority of my colleagues, so that she can deliver on Brexit. People want us to get on with it.
She could go at any time. I mean, she's safe from a further vote for a year.
Yes.
But, I mean, she may decide to throw in the towel.
Well, that's rather against her character. I know the Prime Minister quite well, and throwing in the towel isn't what she does.
Well, she has failed so far, and there's no evidence that she's going to succeed in this particular endeavour.
Well, she is best placed to bring back a deal that can both get through the House of Commons and be ratified, but also deliver on Brexit, yet make sure that we have a close relationship with the EU.
But she got nothing from the Netherlands, she got nothing from Germany, she got nothing from Paris.
Well, you don't know that. We don't know.
Well, I think she'd have been crowing if she had.
Well, no, because the European Council, when all the leaders get together, is at the end of this week. And so it may take some time to put together what's needed. But the crucial thing is, tonight, I very much hope that a large number of my colleagues will have backed her, because she's the right person to do the job.
What is a large number?
I'm not. I think as far as
talk to me about large numbers without spelling one out.
No, that's what I hope for.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, a win's a win. If she wins by one, you could say this: if she won by 52% to 48%. we should then follow the result.
Matt Hancock, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's it from me for the moment. Shall we go across now to Krishnan inside the House of Commons in the central lobby? Krishnan.
Yes, we're right in the heart of Parliament, and from the Health Secretary to a doctor, because joining me now is Philip Lee. Now, he resigned as a minister to speak out about Brexit, and he supports a people's vote, and you've supported Theresa May tonight?
I have, yes.
Why?
I must say it wasn't with much enthusiasm, because I want to see the Prime Minister change her Brexit policy, but when you look at the situation here, I thought introducing even more chaos wasn't going to help. I hope and expect now the Prime Minister is going to reflect upon the situation of her deal. It is not passing this House.
So you think she's going to win?
I think it's probably likely she is. I mean, it's an anonymous vote. People are walking around. You're getting a mood that there have been people voting against it. I wouldn't want to put a number on it, but it may go north of 100.
So where does that leave her? In
post, but I hope reflective on the situation, that even though there were people like me have voted for her, to support her this evening, it isn't because I support the policy. The policy at the moment is coming up against a brick wall. This deal is not passing the House. Any formulation that comes out of Brussels will not pass this House. So we're left with two choices. It's either no deal or we have a second referendum.
So you don't think the no-deal Brexiteers, the ERG, have been killed off by tonight? They remain strong?
They're going to come again. I'm not so sure they judged the timing of this particularly well. But I understand their frustrations from their perspective. They're not getting what they campaigned for. And so this is the problem. We are coming up against a brick wall. And we have to find a way through this because we need to get on with the government of the country.
But is no deal really a risk? I mean, if there is a vote in Parliament against no deal, can it be ignored by the government?
Technically, yes.
But in reality...
And it could be right up against the deadline in March, as I understand it. We don't want to see this. Why don't we just recognise that the Brexit deal doesn't match what was promised in 2016, no deal doesn't match what was promised in 2016, and that we need to go back to the British public to get their informed consent before we proceed.
But the other way of looking at this is that Theresa May's position, which is there's going to be no second referendum as long as she's Prime Minister, has been upheld tonight if she survives.
Yeah, well, I mean, when the facts change, you change your position, don't you? And the facts of the matter is nothing. It's passing this House. And so we have to pivot to the British public to get a democratic solution from them.
And do you think this idea that there are these kamikaze Brexiteers who are prepared to take this and join Labour and the SNP in a no-confidence vote in order to try and get rid of her, I mean, do they exist?
I think some people are quite committed to the cause, Krishnan. Yeah, and I think that we have to tread carefully with this because the numbers are very balanced here. But fundamentally, this House does not want no deal. So if it doesn't want no deal, it's going to have to vote for a second referendum.
Philip Lee, thank you very much indeed. Well, don't forget, this vote goes on until 8 o'clock, and then they will start the counting. It shouldn't take that long. I mean, some people think this may only take 15 or 20 minutes to actually get a result, but we may have to wait a little bit longer than that for the formalities. And the coverage of what's going on, our coverage, will continue. You can watch it on the Channel 4 News website, which is channel4.com/news, and we'll be going until there's a result and we know what's happened. Michael Crick has been outside Committee Room 14. Had your ear to the door?
Indeed. I mean, Theresa May turned up at 5 o'clock to address the 1922 committee. The meeting was absolutely packed, so packed that some of the Prime Minister's entourage couldn't get in the room for lack of space. The corridor teeming with journalists, really hot. And of course we heard the customary banging of desks and the door and everything as the Prime Minister spoke and at the end of her speech. But somebody warned me today, a Tory MP who's a veteran of these things, that actually the amount of banging probably reflects the number of people who are going to vote against her. Now, what did Mrs May say? Well, she basically said to them, look, her sole focus was going to be on getting Brexit delivered from now on. She made it clear that she wasn't going to call a snap election, that as far as she was concerned, the next election was in 2022, and she made it clear that she would not be fighting that election as Conservative leader. However, the tricky bit then came in the questions, because the anti-May forces had planted a number of tricky questions from new MPs. They might not have expected to ask tricky questions in the audience. And indeed, Adam Holloway, not so much of a new MP, he actually asked, well, Prime Minister, what happens if the next election is in the next 12 months? And of course, she did not give an answer to that, because of course she couldn't really answer that, because if she'd answered that, then they'd ask, well, what about the next 3 months?
Yes, because Jacob Rees-Mogg is among those who's concerned that saying I don't intend to stand the next election isn't an absolute cast-iron guarantee.
No, and indeed, Mrs. May has said a number of things in the past, notably that there wasn't going to be an election, a snap election
was
before.
going to go ahead on this week
so
as well.
I think people are wary about this. As for the voting, well, when I left about 7 o'clock, most of the big beasts had voted, but not the Prime Minister herself yet.
Just the monsters left. Michael Crick, thank you very much. Let's go to Kathy, who is outside number 10.
Thanks, Krish. Well, of course, we won't know for another hour or so, maybe a bit less, if Theresa May will be returning here tonight with her leadership and her premiership intact. There are those who argue that if she wins tonight, her authority has actually been enhanced, boosting her chances of getting her Brexit deal through Parliament. One cabinet minister I bumped into earlier today insisted that today was a turning point for the PM and her deal. Something's changed here today, they told me. And one of the biggest things which has changed is that she's set a time limit on how long she's going to be living behind these shiny black doors. By announcing she won't lead her party into the next general election, her friends say she's put the national interest first. And if you speak to people who really know her, they say that's characteristic of a woman whose overriding concern is doing her duty. Now, of course, a lot of MPs have a massive ego. They really relish the spotlight and all the manoeuvring that goes on around Westminster. But Theresa May is not really like that. She's quite a shy person, really, and has little truck with the kind of boysy political games playing, which is both her strength and her weakness. I've been looking back at the Prime Minister's turbulent tenure. This was Theresa May's proudest moment, becoming Prime Minister 2.5 years ago and making her pitch to the nation on the steps of number 10.
But the mission to make Britain a country that works for everyone means more than fighting these injustices.
This morning, the same defiance, the same steeliness.
I will contest that vote with everything I've got.
Now, though, desperately vulnerable. Her dreams of delivering Brexit and an ambitious domestic reform agenda gone.
At this moment of enormous national significance, there should be unity here in Westminster. But instead, there is division. The country is coming together, but Westminster is not.
Was this her moment of hubris? She called an election in the belief she could end the division in Westminster, but the unassailable mandate she sought eluded her.
We need to ensure we've got that strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable leadership.
Doesn't this show that you are really weak and wobbly, not strong and stable?
The strong and stable mantra sounding more and more like a bad Christmas cracker joke. Once she lost her parliamentary majority, it seemed she lost all authority with it. Lost too dozens of her ministerial colleagues. The Chancellor good enough to hand her a cough suite, others choking on the demand for loyalty. The single-mindedness which had seemed such an asset now felt to many like a stubborn unwillingness to listen. And yet she dances on. The daughter of a vicar driven by a powerful sense of duty. The lonely only child somehow summoning the strength to rise above her increasing isolation and the taunts of the Westminster Bullingdon boys and bullies. But at what cost? Britain's Prime Minister at risk of becoming a laughingstock on the international stage. Getting locked in her car last night, just the latest little humiliation for the Prime Minister. And the country too, as it struggles still to work out in Theresa May's own words just how Brexit means Brexit. Well, earlier I spoke to Damien Green, who's one of Theresa May's oldest political allies, and I began by asking him what impact the last few months would have had on her.
Well, it's not just the last few months. She was Home Secretary for 6 years. She's been Prime Minister through 2.5 of the most dramatic, tumultuous and difficult years we've known in recent times. And the effect it will have had on her will have been to allow her to examine her inner strength, which is what she's got, which is what so many people admire so much, that whatever the situation, she will try to do the right thing. She won't think about herself. She'll think about the public interest, and you can agree with her or disagree with her on individual issues, but I think everyone recognises that everything she does is in what she sees as the public interest, and that inner strength allows her to carry through these periods when life is very, very difficult.
Do you think she will privately admit that she's made some pretty serious mistakes in her handling of Brexit, in her running of the government?
I don't think any Prime Minister would ever privately say they got everything right, because it's a job that throws 100 things at you a day, and if you get 90 of them right, you're doing absolutely brilliantly. And this is the most difficult issue for a Conservative Prime Minister particularly, but perhaps for any Prime Minister that we've faced for decades. So it's not surprising that there have been some bumps in the road, but I think when you
That's
look,
a bit of an understatement, isn't it?
when you look back at it, you will see a consistency of purpose in what she's done. And I think as long as you can maintain that sense of direction, then you can withstand, not just the bumps in the road, but maybe the stones the road is throwing up, or people from the sidelines are throwing as well.
The road running out altogether.
Well, we are. I mean, I think we're in clock ticking rather than road running out metaphors now. But yes, I mean, I think she's got that consistency of purpose, and that's absolutely vital at a time like this.
Damien Green, thank you very much. Well, Theresa May was due to meet the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar today as she continued to seek assurances about her Brexit deal. Well, our Europe editor Matt Fry is in Brussels today. Matt.
Thanks, Cathy. Well, actually, at one stage last night they were saying that she would also come here to Brussels after Dublin, but as we know, she's otherwise engaged. Now, the question here in Brussels is, will she turn up tomorrow for an emergency meeting on Brexit as caretaker Prime Minister, or the actual Prime Minister? As one senior EU official put it to me, the whole business of Brexit was foisted on us by the internal rifts in the Tory party. Tonight's drama takes it to a whole new, absurd and rather perilous level. Now, if Theresa May survives tonight, you can expect an ovation of sorts for the survivor of Brexit Island, but no substantial changes to the deal. Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, said again today that the divorce deal cannot be changed. But here too, they are utterly confused by the mess in London, wondering how any Prime Minister can escape the Brexit maze. Well, with me tonight is Tony Connolly, Brussels Bureau Chief of the Irish broadcaster RT. Good to see you again here in the freezing cold, Tony. Exasperation is the right word, isn't it, for describing the mood here in these buildings around us regarding the events in London?
Yeah, they've been exasperated for quite some time. They've been trying to process what goes on in Westminster. To many here it seems like a parallel universe, but I think they would prefer stability to more chaos.
Does that mean that they're hoping that she will prevail tonight? And if she does prevail tonight and she comes here tomorrow as the real Prime Minister, what will they give her in return?
Well, I think they would prefer to see a bit of continuity and see her here tomorrow. She will talk to them in the afternoon. She'll set out her case for some reassurances. They'll have dinner then as 28. They'll discuss foreign policy. Then after dinner, the 27 will get together and they will knock about what she's had to say and decide what they can give her. It's really in the ballpark of reassurances, clarification, highlighting. In fact, talk earlier this week of some kind of legal text or protocol or mechanism has actually been downplayed in the past couple of hours, and people are now talking about simple clarification.
If she doesn't prevail tonight, what happens then? Here?
Well, they will then just have to wait and see if somebody is sent from London. Everything.
What about the bigger
back
picture? I mean, the next Prime Minister. What's their worst case scenario here? What keeps them up at night?
We spoke to one diplomat this afternoon who said, of course the personality matters in a negotiation, but the substance will not really change. As far as the EU is concerned, the withdrawal agreement, the political declaration are both closed. They can't be reopened. No matter who the interlocutor is, what the best they can manage is to offer clarification and to highlight what exactly the backstop means, how long it will be in place, and how much nobody actually wants it there in the first place.
Do they see a no Brexit or indeed a second referendum looming further into the centre ground?
Well, I think once you get into the new year, once you get over Christmas, and then the question of what happens on the 21st of January, and the question of whether the withdrawal agreement can finally somehow pass the House of Commons, then you get into some very, very stark choices, because you will see the deadline coming down the tracks. The markets will start to get very nervous. Then it's a simple case of
Is it this deal? Is it a second referendum? Is it no deal? And the closer you get to no deal, I think the more real and foreboding that will become. And people here will hope that, common sense will prevail.
And then there are 585 pages of paper of the divorce deal just sitting on a table somewhere. People must be wondering, was that a waste of paper? Tony Connolly, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. More from Brussels here later in the programme, and reaction hopefully to the vote later tonight. Over to you, Krishna.
Thanks, Matt. Welcome back to Central Lobby. Still half an hour of voting to go in this confidence vote. Boris Johnson just walked past us grinning a few minutes ago, but didn't say anything about how he'd voted. Michael Crick has been trying to glean a few more pearls of what's been going on. What's the latest?
Well, I was up there a couple of minutes ago. About 80% of people, roughly 80% of MPs, have now voted, including the Prime Minister, who was voting while I was talking to you before. I mean, we should get pretty much a 100% turnout tonight, and it shouldn't take long to count them. I mean, they've only got 2 piles of papers. It should be counted by about 8:15. And then the operation begins to interpret the result. I mean, people are saying, well, what counts as success for the Prime Minister? If she keeps the number of opponents below 100 or maybe 2 to 1. And a lot of it, I think, will depend on how the two sides spin it afterwards. The spinning operation in the past on these occasions has often been just as important as the actual figures.
One MP was just suggesting to me that tonight suits Theresa May and that it may not have just been an ERG operation to bring it to a head. He was suggesting that maybe the whips have helped us get to this point so that she can win and win quickly.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't think she would have wanted tonight, not amidst everything else, not amidst going around Europe, suddenly having to interrupt a European tour to try and sort out the Irish backstop problem, having to cancel the meeting, the trip to Ireland, and deal with this.
If she loses, what happens? I mean, is there any agreement around who will stand?
Well, there are dozens of people who are in the running for standing, and there are probably more candidates this time than I've ever known for a leadership election. And I think there must be at least a dozen who are seriously thinking about it. Who are the main contenders? Well, I think Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, is obviously a contender. Dominic Raab, who resigned, of course, as Brexit Secretary a few weeks ago. Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary. David Davis, I think. Another former Brexit secretary. I think he'll certainly be mulling it over. He stood for the leadership couple of times before, and many, many others. Dark horse, I'd say Penny Mordaunt, but it could well be somebody else.
But you spend a lot of time talking to Conservative associations. Can a Remainer win the Conservative Party leadership?
I don't think they can, because I don't think the ordinary members, because ultimately this goes to the members. The MPs here would whittle it down to 2 names, and those names are put to the members. And the Conservative associations are going to be overwhelmingly or pretty strongly pro-Brexit. I can't see them voting for somebody, say, like Amber Rudd, who would probably be the leading Remain contender who might put herself forward.
So that's ultimately why Remainers and People's Voters will have supported her.
Sorry,
so that's why they will have all supported her.
And the other question is Boris Johnson. Now, I don't think Boris Johnson can get into the last 2 because he's not that popular amongst MPs, and indeed a number of MPs have said that they would resign the whip under Johnson.
OK, go back upstairs, Michael. Thank you.
I will do.
Now, John.
Well, now, ministers have been queuing up all day to pledge their loyalty to Theresa May, but then, again, many of them have been mentioned as possible successors if the Prime Minister loses tonight's vote. One of those on the Remainer wing, as Christian just mentioned, one of the Remainers on that wing of the party is Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd, who I spoke to earlier. I put it to her that Mrs May has flunked the vote in the Commons. Europe doesn't seem prepared to budge. Does something else have to give?
Well, we don't know what negotiations are going to be improved from the Prime Minister's efforts with Europe, and I think that she was planning on seeing Varadkar today. So this is still in play, the response that she's made to try and reassure colleagues on the backstop. I mean, I think it's a mistake, but the Conservative Party has always had people who have different views on Europe, and there's a reasonable cohort of my colleagues who are dissatisfied with the deal as it is. I hope that when we get through today and the Prime Minister wins the vote of no confidence, they'll be able to support the Prime Minister going forward.
Well, you know the inside of the party. Do you think she's bound to win tonight?
I think she is going to win tonight, yes. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues. As you can imagine, everyone's talking about it in the tea room, and it sounds to me like she's going to win convincingly.
convincingly means what?
Well, I'm not going to be drawn on numbers because I just don't know. It'll be too much of a hostage to fortune, but I do believe she's going to win, yes. As long as she wins, then she will have the support of the party and she'll be able to continue. And I must say that a lot of party members have been telling me that they're pretty disappointed in the changes that have taken place today and in the proposed vote for no confidence. Most of us realise we need to get on with this very difficult job in hand. The Prime Minister is the person to do that, and the sooner we get through today, the better.
If she doesn't do as well as you're predicting she will, are you a candidate next time round?
John, all I'm interested in doing is supporting the Prime Minister as our leader. I think it's a terrific mistake to start speculating on what the consequences would be or who might stand. I mean, the worst thing about it is that it would take weeks to get a new leader in place, and all the time when we've only got until the end of March to agree a deal because we're leaving the European Union. So it's completely the wrong approach.
The biggest problem is actually we're not prepared, physically prepared for what is going to happen.
No, we are prepared for leaving the European Union with this withdrawal agreement, which has a transition period, which will give us the time to make the further preparations for when we have the full exit at the end of it.
So you can say, hand on heart, there will not be 17-mile queues at Dover. There will not be any of the shortages or stockpiling or any of the other things that have been talked about. We're just going to sail on and
I can say hand on heart that is the case, because the withdrawal agreement gives us a transition period which leaves us the status quo in many ways largely as it is. It's when we come out of the transition period that those challenges will be in place. But in order to have the transition period, we need to sign the agreement.
You can see my face. I have to say, if it happens, I'll be playing that tape again.
No, but if the withdrawal agreement is signed, the transition agreement leaves everything largely as it is. It's when we come to the end that question will be really relevant.
Amber Rudd, thank you very much for talking to us. Well, now, for the moment, it's just Tory MPs who will decide whether Theresa May stays on as Prime Minister. But what do voters think of today's developments? Our North of England correspondent, Claire Fallon, is in a village in the Conservative seat of Shipley in West Yorkshire. Claire.
Well, we are about 7 miles from Bradford here, 177 miles from Westminster, and later on this evening, at about the time that we're expecting to get the results of the votes of Tory MPs, here at Cullingworth's Conservative Club, we'll have entertainment from a Swedish singer called Lena, and I'm told there'll be pie and peas in the interval, but that's not actually the reason why we're here. Theresa May keeps on saying that outside of the Westminster bubble, people just want them to get on with it. But do they? Or do people here actually side with their local MP who wants Theresa May out? We spent the day in the village of Saltaire, not far from here, talking to people about what they want and what they think will happen next.
Between Bradford and the hills, a village built by a mill boss for his mill workers. Sir Titus Salt knew a thing or two about revolution, the industrial one anyway.
I think he would be saying, let's do it, let's do something.
Phil the gardener has little faith in politicians. In fact, he reckons Barney his dog would do a better job.
Evil only prospers when good men do nothing.
And what, you think there's a bunch of MPs sitting around doing nothing at the moment?
Yes, I think a lot of them are swanning around trying to see who is going to win the upper hand, and then they'll go with them for their own ends rather than for the ends of for the good of the country.
Just up the road, same constituency, but we're in Bingley. The area voted narrowly to leave the EU. Its hardline Brexit MP is one of those trying to get Theresa May out.
I feel sorry for Theresa May, actually, because I do think she's worked really hard to do what she's supposed to be doing, you know, but she hasn't had the support that I think she expected to have.
So do you think that your MP should have backed her rather than trying to kick her out?
I do, actually.
Yes,
yeah, I
I'll
do.
have a word with him, I know him, yeah. She has to go.
She's got to go?
She has to go.
Why is that?
Well, she won't be able to achieve what she's trying to achieve, will she?
While Westminster self-obsesses, for Andy, no deal, no problem.
At the end of the day, I don't think there's going to be kind of like pillaging and looting in the streets. No, let's just see where it takes us.
But try telling Sarah that, an opera singer from Belgium, showing her dad around the country she now calls home.
You know, everyone does know about the passports, what colour they're going to be all of a sudden, but no one knows what to do with us, which is slightly frustrating, and like I said, yeah, it's true, heartbreaking.
These are uncertain times for sure, and for some, things are more uncertain than others.
Well, joining me here in Central Lobby is the leading Eurosceptic Sir Bernard Jenkin. Your side has made a mess of it, haven't they? This has all backfired.
I don't know what you mean.
You're going to lose, aren't you?
Well, let's wait and see. The problems will remain if we're not able to have a new Prime Minister. The difficulties we've got that she has created for herself, an agreement that the DUP rejects, means that the coalition agreement that she formed after the 2017 general election is no longer working, so she can't really command a majority in the House of Commons.
But this is a cat-handed coup, isn't it? I mean, yesterday there was Nadine Dorries comparing the Prime Minister to Hitler in Downfall, and tonight we're hearing the ERG's having an emergency meeting. It's your lot who are in the bunker.
No, I know of no emergency meeting. This is news to me. I'm not involved in any emergency meeting.
So what will happen then? I mean, there is talk that some of you are prepared to join Labour and the SNP in a no-confidence vote to bring down the government.
That certainly is rubbish. And
you haven't heard any of that?
I haven't heard anything like that, and I would never countenance such a thing.
So she then has your support, does she, if she wins
If
tonight?
she wins this, she has my support.
To do what?
Well, to try and deal with the problems that we are facing. If she wins tonight, I will certainly give her my support.
But do you accept that there is no majority in the House of Commons for no deal?
No, I don't, because the House of Commons represents 650 constituencies, at least 400 or more than 400 seats voted leave. I, in the end, don't believe that MPs are going to vote against what their constituencies voted for. What they want is reassurance. But all the polls suggest that the constituencies are shifting. Which poll are you referring to?
Well, there's certainly the 20,000 Channel 4 Survation poll suggested that large portions of the North East, Wales and the North West had gone from Leave to Remain.
Well, Professor John Curtis, the BBC poll,
and John Curtis did our poll. So
has consistently said that really the underlying sentiment towards the EU has not changed. This country wants to leave. Obviously, people will be getting a jaundiced view of leave because of the way that Parliament is conducting this and the way the government is conducting this. But in the end, in its heart, this country wants to leave, and it's the duty of the politicians who are elected here. We gave them that decision. I mean, the vote was overwhelmingly in favour of David Cameron's referendum bill to give them the decision, remain or leave, and then we overwhelmingly implemented the decision to leave.
Theresa May still thinks that the only problem with her deal is the backstop. That's the only thing she has identified as needing to change. Is she right in that?
Well, I think if she fixed the backstop, that is to create a withdrawal agreement which we could exit at the end of unilaterally without being subject to some veto by the European Union, that would be a very, very, very big step
You would
forward.
then vote for the deal, would you? So if the backstop was time limited...
Let's see what's in the agreement that's finally brought back to the House of Commons if it is renegotiated.
Well, it's quite important that you just say what you're prepared to vote for, isn't it?
Well, I'm also concerned about...
The clock is ticking.
I'm also concerned about committing £39 billion to an agreement without any guarantee of what we get at the end of it. I'm also concerned about an agreement that is so unbalanced we fix European Union law and the Court of Justice above the agreement, so we are still subject to the European Court of Justice. I'm also concerned about an agreement that doesn't actually give us the freedom to make trade deals with other countries. This doesn't sound like leave to me.
And if she is forced into a position of backing another referendum, are you ready to fight it?
There's no question that she will be forced into that position. She could volunteer for it, but how can she be forced into it? We have passed the law in Parliament.
Well, there may be a majority in the Commons eventually if Labour switches.
In the end, we have passed the law to leave on the 29th.
Are you ready for it, is what I'm asking? If there's a second referendum, are you ready to fight?
Well, there isn't going to be a second referendum. It's a ruse by people who don't want to leave the European Union, who've never accepted the result of the referendum. And certainly Theresa May is not going to submit to that, which is why I'll carry on supporting her.
Sir Bernard Jenkin, thank you very much indeed. Carry on supporting her after voting against her.
Well, you can laugh, but if we lose the vote, we have to respect the result.
Sir Bernard, thank you very much indeed.
It's called respecting democracy, and that's why we should respect the referendum.
Thank you very much. Now let's go to Jackie, who's in the studio with more of today's news.
Thank you, Krishnan.
Now, French police have said that the gunman who shot dead 2 people in an attack on a Christmas market shouted, "God is great," as he opened fire. 12 people were wounded in the attack in the crowded, narrow streets of Strasbourg. The gunman, who is thought to be a 29-year-old local man who was radicalised in prison, is still on the run. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Miller is in Strasbourg. Jonathan.
Yes, Jackie, tonight there is a killer on the run, and the French Interior Minister has said that he may have already left France. This city, Strasbourg, sits right on the German border. Now, it turns out that the 29-year-old suspect was well known to police. He's got a string of 27 convictions, in fact, across France, Germany and Switzerland, and it seems that when he spent time in jail, he was radicalised. Last night he walked across this very bridge I'm standing on, straight down into Strasbourg's famous Christmas market, where he opened fire. It was a savage and deadly reminder that lone wolf attackers still pose a very real threat. France is back on max alert. The Strasbourg lockdown failed to snare the gunman. A full-scale international manhunt in full swing. Echoes of the Berlin Christmas market attack 2 years ago. The festive spirit of this city sapped. The blood of innocents splashed again on European streets.
The security level will never be high enough to avoid an attack from a mad person. It's absolutely unavoidable. What can you do?
The fugitive suspect named tonight as Sherif Shakat, French citizen, Strasbourg born and bred. He'd been on the terror watch list. He'd opened fire in 3 locations. The screams are truly chilling as he rampaged through the Christmas tourist heartland of this beautiful old city, killing randomly as he reportedly yelled, "Allahu Akbar." He evaded capture by commandeering a taxi and making his escape.
During his journey, he opened fire several times with a handgun and used a knife with which he seriously injured and killed people. Faced with 4 soldiers from the Sentinel operation, he fired in their direction. They shot back and he was injured in the arm.
This Irish MEP had just taken a Christmas market selfie moments before the killer struck.
Just as we were walking into the vicinity, shots rang out. There were 2 shots or 3, which I thought was fireworks, in line with the atmosphere around us, but it became quite evident and clear that it was not.
The European Parliament was in session at the time. Today, they held a minute's silence.
Il faut aller de l'avant.
We have to go forward. We should not change our habits. This is why yesterday we continued to work in the plenary session.
The truth is, habits have changed, though. It's just that seeing combat-ready troops patrolling streets is normal now. 3 years have now elapsed since those jihadist massacres in Paris, which shook this country to its core. In that time, the Islamic State group has been dislodged from territory it held in Syria and Iraq, and there have been fewer attacks on European soil. France had begun to breathe easy again, and of late has been less consumed by terror than it has been by the Gilets jaunes revolt. What happened last night here, though, has rattled France again and brought with it a dreaded sense of déjà vu.
Jonathan Miller reporting. Police in Scotland are investigating the death of a new mother who is thought to have got lost and collapsed inside Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. Amanda Cox was reported missing when she didn't return to the maternity ward after visiting her newborn son. The 34-year-old was only found within the hospital itself after a 5-hour search. Police said Miss Cox's death was being treated as unexplained, but not suspicious. A contrite and crying Michael Cohen has been sentenced to 3 years in jail. The former personal lawyer and fixer of the US president told the court his blind loyalty to Donald Trump had led him astray. Kylie Morris was in the New York City courtroom. Kylie.
Jackie, it seems we are now entering the final episode of this dramatic journey of Michael Cohen, from fierce defender of Donald Trump to someone who became a key witness for the Mueller inquiry, of course, probing possible wrongdoing by the president. he might have hoped that he would be spared jail on account of his cooperation with the Mueller inquiry. That hasn't happened. The judge here today described a veritable smorgasbord of criminal conduct from Michael Cohen, ranging from tax evasion to lying to a bank, lying to Congress, and of course campaign finance violations. Now, it's that final crime that steers this case closest to the White House's door. Of course, Michael Cohen is accused of, has now been convicted of making hush money payments to two women just before the presidential election back in 2016, who say they were having extramarital affairs with Donald Trump, affairs which he denies. But I think what's critical here is that Michael Cohen has said before, and indeed the judge today again repeated the allegation, that those payments were made in coordination with and the direction of individual one. Now that's President Trump to you and I. Michael Cohen did make a statement before the court. He said, counterintuitively, today is the day I'm getting my freedom back, that he'd been living in a personal and mental incarceration ever since the day he accepted a job with the real estate mogul whose business acumen he admired, Donald Trump. He said his own weakness and blind loyalty had led him to choose darkness over light, and he had covered up the dirty deeds of the president. So we know how it ends for Michael Cohen. How does it end for President Trump? President Trump, of course, says that Michael Cohen has been lying and that these were simple personal payments. However, the special counsel was represented in the court today. They say that they believe, certainly, that Michael Cohen has been telling them the truth. Now that's back to John in Westminster.
Thank you, Kylie. Well, welcome back to Westminster, where in a quarter of an hour or so, we will know whether Theresa May has survived the vote of confidence amongst Tory MPs. What does the vote mean for the Brexit process? To try to answer that, I'm joined by former UKIP leader Nigel Farage in Strasbourg. And thank you very much for hanging on, Nigel Farage. I know we've kept you waiting. And the People's Vote campaigner, Alastair Campbell, is with me here out on the green in Westminster. Nigel Farage, if we track back in history, you are the agent of where we are now. Your allies in the Tory party have tried to behead the Prime Minister, and of course a Brexit deal you don't like is in trouble in the Commons. Pleased with your handiwork?
Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it, if the Prime Minister just simply kept her promises. I mean, this isn't just about the referendum, you know, that people voted in. It's also about a general election in which she could not have been clearer. In her manifesto, we weren't just leaving the European Union, we were leaving the single market and the customs union too. She's the one that actually has betrayed voters who put their trust in her. This deal is a terrible deal. It's the worst deal in history, and ever since she agreed to the backstop, to think that we're going to go into something that we can't unilaterally get out of, I think the Eurosceptics and the Tory party had to try to get rid of her, but it's pretty clear to me they've failed.
Alastair Campbell?
Well, I mean, I don't agree with Nigel about much, but what I do agree with is that this is a terrible deal, and that's why she's in the mess that she's in. And don't forget that the reason for that is the combination of the Good Friday Agreement, which was delivered when you had governments, Tory and Labour, that were competent and strong and stable and knew how to negotiate, allied to the red lines that she put down, partly to appeal to people like Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and the rest of them. The combination of that led to the fact, the necessity from the Europeans' perspective, rightly in my view, of the backstop. Now, in there now, she probably will get through it, but the problems that have been created by this process, they are not going away, and it's why I do believe this eventually is going to go back to another referendum.
You tell us, Nigel Farage, how you see Brexit getting through now, given that even the Brexit that she was suggesting to Parliament couldn't even face a vote.
Well, I mean, tomorrow there's a summit in Brussels. I'll be there. I'm as certain as I can be, talking to group leaders here in Strasbourg today, there will be no significant concessions of any kind at all. So she comes back from Brussels with virtually nothing, perhaps a codicil that'll be added to the withdrawal agreement. My guess is she won't put it to Parliament next week. This will run into the new year. I don't see any way this deal gets through Parliament, and then we're going to face at some point, maybe towards the end of next month, a very big moment of what happens. Do we carry on, given the legislation that we've got, and just leave on March the 29th on World Trade Organization rules, which I haven't got a problem with, but I'm not convinced. I mean, particularly given that the Chancellor today called Eurosceptics extremists, So I think, and by the way, I don't want this, but I think we're headed towards a moment where we may well see a big push for Article 50 to be extended.
Article 50 to be extended or conceivably remain?
Well, I'm pleased that Nigel recognises I think we are heading to Article 50 being extended, and I think the European Union will only go for that if they understand that there is a process towards a different course. They're not going to do it just to let the Tory party carry on squabbling amongst themselves. And I also think from Nigel's perspective, I actually think the vision of Brexit that he has, he's not going to get it through Theresa May, so actually I think that Nigel's side of the argument should be out for a people's vote as well. This thing has got to go back to the people at some stage. The country is not uniting around any vision of Brexit, and it's got to go back to the people.
Nigel Farage. People's vote?
Well, there's one slight problem there, Alastair, and it's this. Well, hang on. There's one slight problem here, that with the last referendum, we were told explicitly that this was our decision and it would be implemented. That was then backed up in a general election, 85% of people voting for parties that wanted to leave. And Alastair, the idea that we have a second referendum, why wouldn't you simply ignore that referendum the way you have the first one?
The whole problem with this, though, Nigel, is you did not have a plan. You and your people fought for this Brexit for years and years and years and years.
We voted to leave.
Yes, but you didn't have a plan for what that means. And the government has tried to make sense of it, and they've not been able to do so. And I also think that the country's not united after the first referendum. I think if there is another one, all the people who are involved in it, people like you, all the leaders of the parties, all the leaders of the campaigns, you just have to say, whatever the outcome now, this is it, last chance, we go out there, but you have to come up with a credible, deliverable Brexit plan to put against Remain. And you haven't got one, Nigel, that's your problem.
The credible, deliverable Brexit plan is the one I fought for 25 years, which is a simple free trade agreement. And yes, assurances on both sides of the Irish border. This Prime Minister didn't even try for a free trade agreement. She tried, ever since that Florence speech, to get us back, wrapped in to as much of the European Union as she possibly could. I repeat the point. This is now a matter of trust, and we have far too many people in our political, media and business classes willfully disregarding the greatest democratic exercise in the history of our nation. And to ask us to do it again because you don't accept the result fills me with no confidence that when Leave wins a second referendum, as it would by a bigger margin, that you would change your position one iota.
Well, if you're so confident, why not go for it? And I don't think you are confident, because I think actually you do.
Because you'd ignore it.
No, it's not down to me. And also, you talk about this being some kind of elite.
You'd ignore it.
This would be about
You're not
the
a Democrat.
people. This would be about the people saying whether the mess that you've helped create is what they want to proceed with. And they don't, Nigel, and you probably deep down you know it.
We had this last time. No, I don't agree with that at all. In fact, actually what I'm seeing is a lot of people out there so disgusted by this whole process, so disgusted by our political class that they would vote to leave again. I think in much bigger numbers.
This thing about you not being the
that is
political
not
class.
the point. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. You cannot lie to the people on this scale. You simply don't accept the democratic will of the British people, and that of itself is a disgrace.
It's 903 days since the referendum. We've had an election since then. We've got a Conservative Party in turmoil, and you still have not been able to put forward a plan that in paper we can all read and say that's how Brexit would work. You haven't done it, Nigel.
Alastair, I want us to be an independent countries. And independent countries
so do I. That's
make
what
their
we
own
are.
laws, control their own borders, choose their own friends around the world. That is what the Brexit vote was about. Us being a free, independent
we haven't got any
country,
friends around the world.
Not governed by a bunch of old men in Brussels. And the one point of agreement is that Mrs May is messing this argument up from both sides by trying to please everybody, and in the end, pleasing absolutely nobody.
But that's why I'm saying, if you're confident and if they're screwing up to the extent that they are, you get behind another referendum and let's see what people really think. Because let's be honest, Nigel, nobody voted for this
and the third one as well. And the third referendum, and the fourth referendum. You will never accept a democratic result against this set of institutions. You will never accept it. You didn't last time. Why should we believe you?
Why should we believe you?
Well, sorry, I thought John's opted out of this debate because I've explained to you, Nigel, the difference between the Brexit that you promised, the Brexit that Boris Johnson promised. They're all different, and now people know.
Brexit is Brexit.
Now people know. Brexit is Brexit means nothing. Theresa May's found that. You have not explained to the country how your Brexit would actually work and how it wouldn't make people poorer and make this country weaker. And the reason for that is because you know
it's
that you
the
can't.
Brexit, Alastair, we all agreed on. It's the Brexit you agreed on. It's the Brexit we all agreed on. It's the Brexit that it's the Brexit. It's the Brexit.
Go and
that
write
has
a
out
draft
of the single
treaty.
market,
Nigel Farage,
out of the European Union.
Alastair
Every
Campbell,
single major player.
Nigel Farage, Alastair Campbell, thank you both. The argument lives on. Very grateful to both of you. We can now go back to Krishnan in the House of Commons. Krishnan.
Welcome back to Central Lobby, and the voting should have finished. Michael, is it all over?
Well, it looks like it. It's, 8 o'clock? The polls should have closed. We know that Gavin Williamson, the former Chief Whip, now Defence Secretary, went in about 5 minutes ago. It looks like he was one of the last. He mischievously joked with reporters and said, I think I'll vote for the Prime Minister. Well, she's in trouble if he doesn't. And now they'll get counting them. And we'll be looking at not just who's voted no confidence in the Prime Minister and who's voted confidence in her, but of course there'll also be a block, in all likelihood, of abstentions, people who haven't voted one way or the other. How do you count them? People who haven't expressed support for the Prime Minister. On the other hand, they haven't expressed no confidence.
So when you step back today, if she has survived, what does it all add up to?
Well, first of all, we may not really know whether she's survived until tomorrow or even later, because it may be a grey area, the votes. It may well be that technically she survives the actual vote, she wins the vote, but people may say, look, it's so close, it's a lot closer than we expected. You just simply can't carry on when so many of your party have no longer got any confidence in you. It may well be that it takes the men in grey suits, traditionally, the cabinet members.
Who are the men in grey suits?
Well, they're leading members of the cabinet, and of course Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, would sort of fit that description.
And so then what happens?
Well, they may, if it's close, and if the men in grey suits decide they need to do this, and we've no idea whatsoever, they might persuade her to stand down, and then, of course, there would be a leadership election. Now, that at first involves the members of Parliament, and there'll be lots of people putting their names forward or thinking about it, and they have to whittle the candidates down to just 2. And then those 2 names are put to the wider electorate, the members, the 125,000 members of the Conservative Party. Now, you could do the whittling down process very, very quickly. Normally, you do it every couple of days, you have another ballot. But you could do it so that you have 2 or 3 ballots a day, I suppose. But you haven't got many days left till Christmas. Basically, you've got next week or some of next week. But you could whittle it down perhaps to 2 candidates by Christmas, and then maybe do the election process between Christmas and the New Year, and then the first week or 2 in the New Year. But then you've got to sort this out. You've got to come back to Parliament with a revised withdrawal deal and agreement in order for Parliament to have the vote. So, how you do all this in that time, I've no idea.
Thanks, Michael. Let's go back outside. John.
Well, what a day of high drama here in Westminster it's been. A crisis surrounding Brexit taking a surprising twist, with Theresa May was supposed to be travelling to Dublin, but instead, yes, let's go to the other side of the Thames. You can see into the windows. They've stopped voting. They're not done now. They're not going to be voting anymore. Now we're going to get the result within about the next 15 minutes. But at just before 8 o'clock this morning, we found that more than 48 Conservatives had written their letters saying they had no confidence in Mrs May, hence tonight's voting and hence the continuing crisis. And let's just hear what Mrs May has been saying in the last few minutes. Oh, it was earlier this morning.
Sir Graham Brady has confirmed that he has received 48 letters from Conservative MPs, so there will now be a vote of confidence in my leadership of the Conservative Party. I will contest that vote with everything I've got. I stood to be leader because I believe in the Conservative vision for a better future, a thriving economy with nowhere and nobody left behind, a stronger society where everyone can make the most of their talents, always serving the national interest. And at this crucial moment in our history, that means securing a Brexit deal that delivers on the result of the EU referendum.
Downing Street, will she still be leader? Will she have managed to get 159 of her MPs to vote for her? Stay tuned if you can. In theory, at least, she can win. Now, let's talk now to Gary Gibbon. Gary, well, what are our chances? And we think we'll hear in about, what, 15 minutes?
So it could be something like that. They're not really giving us a lot of guidance on that. But talking to people just been trawling around the corridors of the House of Commons, those people who brought the vote of no confidence against Theresa May didn't look like winners just now, weren't at all sure about their numbers. But you talk to people on the other side and they think those people, whilst they probably haven't toppled Theresa May, that is very much the consensus view inside Parliament, they might well have got a bit more than we might have expected, maybe 110, maybe 120. When you've been Prime Minister for a while, when you've been Home Secretary, when you've been the sort of character that Theresa May is, there are quite a few people you will have rubbed up the wrong way. And there could be people, heaven forfend, who are saying one thing in public and taking this moment to do something completely different in private. In a sense, those numbers I was just talking about, though, what have the rebels got to, all the rest of it, if she stays in power, the thing she's got to focus on is the actual Commons majority, not these numbers. And the search goes on for a consensus to try and get Brexit sorted as far as she's concerned.
Does her cabinet stay intact?
Really interesting dynamics going on in the cabinet. They've been really revealed in this whole 24-hour saga. When you talk to some cabinet ministers, the pro-Remain bunch, they talk about how you're going to have to reach across to Labour to find any kind of solution. When you talk to other cabinet ministers, they turn around and say, well, actually, this is all about getting the DUP on side. Even if you got a few Labour MPs to help you out with a one-night stand helping Theresa May's deal get through, it's the DUP that will actually help you all the way through with the legislation and everything else. And some of them talking about still hoping Theresa May might come back with something from Brussels which the DUP might be satisfied with. They're talking about the different gradations of law that can sometimes satisfy a party like the DUP. It's not necessarily a change to the treaty, but there are other kinds of changes they think are still in play that she might come back with.
Surprising or unsurprising that Labour have been quite so silent today?
Well, I think they're watching the spectacle. They had their own parliamentary meeting last night where they were throwing a few brickbats at each other over these very same issues. I think some of them are thinking the same thing might be happening a little bit to them if they were in these shoes.
I asked Matt Hancock earlier, let's take a look inside the committee room now. Now, I asked him, and I want the same answer from you. Well, not the same answer, but an answer. How many of the votes cast will the casters not be honest about what they voted?
Well, one particular caveat to throw in straight away is that there could be abstentions. One person who's incredibly seasoned in these things, been almost at every one of these in living memory, said they were expecting 10 to 20 abstentions. Seems staggering, wow. Doesn't it? When there's a moment to you can actually have a choice in this absolutely fundamental issue. But for different reasons, maybe because they want Theresa May there, but they really don't like her deal, or the other way round, or not many of them, I don't think. People might be doing that. So I think there'll be a fair number of people who've said one thing to their whips. We had Nadine Dorries in our piece saying that she thought there were some whips who were ringing around whipping votes for the Prime Minister who actually weren't even going to support her themselves.
Let's go back to Cathy and the Christmas tree in number 10. I mean, a jolly festive feel or a bit of anxiety in the air, Cathy?
Well, Theresa May arrived back at 8 o'clock a few minutes ago. We did all yell a question at her. She didn't reply, but she looked fairly cheery. She didn't look like someone who was going back to number 10 to lick her wounds and prepare to move out. However, we don't know the result. There is a lot of speculation that she has won, but we won't know for a little while yet. Of course, if she has won, she will be immeasurably strengthened. And a lot of her allies in the cabinet were saying, well, actually, this is a real game changer. If she's won tonight, she might even manage to get that deal through Parliament. Very sceptical of that because obviously the situation with the deal hasn't really changed. She's still got to get it through all those Brexiteers. She's got to get it through the DUP. But if she fails to do that, could she then put it out to the people, do a second referendum? That's always possible. She said she wouldn't, but she also said she wouldn't have a general election. However, tonight she was looking pretty cheery. But the battle is still ahead. There's still plenty of people, plenty of her opponents, even those who came out today and publicly said they supported her, plenty of them secretly quite want her job. Fatima Manji has been looking at the runners and riders if Theresa May loses tonight.
If the Prime Minister loses tonight, who will replace her in Downing Street? At least 10 names are already being talked about. First up, the favourites. Home Secretary Sajid Javid, a Remainer converted to Brexit. For a while, he's been subtly setting out his stall for leadership. Jeremy Hunt, the current Foreign Secretary, is also considered a strong contender. And Dominic Raab, the last Brexit Secretary, he quit in protest at the PM's proposed deal. Then there are those who've run once for the Tory leadership and may well try again. Boris Johnson, the best-known face of the Leave campaign,
the bastion of independence,
still considered a grassroots favourite, but his reputation among parliamentary colleagues has been damaged. The last leadership run saw Michael Gove initially backing Johnson, then backstabbing him to make a bid himself. Today he was chased outside Parliament by Father Christmas. Might Gove try for the top job again? And David Davis, the first Brexit Secretary. He first ran against David Cameron in 2005 and has refused to rule himself out this time, though he might team up with Dominic Raab. A central question: who will convince the ERG, the Tory backbench Brexit group? Its chairman, Jacob Rees-Mogg, might give it a shot himself. He's certainly building a profile, but may not have enough MPs backing him. Esther McVey also resigned from the cabinet over the Brexit deal. She said she would run if asked. Meanwhile, Remainers in the party may favour Amber Rudd, who's recently rejoined the cabinet, though she's unlikely to have enough parliamentary support. That just leaves the dark horses, and one name increasingly emerging: Penny Mordaunt, International Development Secretary and an ardent Brexiter. Or, of course, it may be none of the above. Whatever happens, one character will definitely gain entry into number 10, Larry the Cat.
So what do we make of this day? I'm joined now by Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator, by Bronwyn Maddox, director of the Institute for Government, and former Tory MP Matthew Parris, now columnist for The Times. Fraser, you have had your ear to the 1922 committee. Tell us what you know.
Well, it wasn't exactly a barnstorming performance by her. She disappointed quite a few MPs who sort of gave a very boosterish speech outside number 10. But in there, she was asked questions like, she said she didn't intend to fight for the next election, not that she wouldn't. She was asked, would she have a snap election to get her deal through? And she didn't really give a denial on that either. And one of the MPs said to her, you do realise, Prime Minister, that stamina is not a strategy. And that kind of resonated because that's what she's offering right now. She'll carry on, not really towards a solution. And one of the MPs there said to me afterwards that he thinks, speaking to his colleagues, he thinks the vote will be a lot tighter than we're imagining right now. Because a lot of ministers we know are publicly supporting her. They have to, they're ministers. But privately are known to want her gone. And right now the Tories don't really trust each other. So even when they're telling each other how they voted, they don't quite believe each other. So there's a lot of uncertainty amongst MPs, especially after the meeting tonight.
Crumbs, sounds a bit weak and wobbly as opposed to strong and stable.
It's been like that ever since she blew her majority, unfortunately, and that's the strange thing about it. Her future has never been in doubt. She's never really had a future since she blew that election. The only question was when to get rid of her. It seems that their only answer is perhaps not today.
Bronwyn Maddox, when it comes to the Constitution and trying to deal with this thing, I mean, presuming she remains Prime Minister with whatever majority, we're still not out of the wood in trying to fix this thing.
No, we're not. I mean, we still have the political obstacle, more than a constitutional one. How does she get Parliament's support for a deal? There wasn't a majority for it before, which is why she pulled the vote. There may well not be a majority for it again. And no sign of why there would be, unless MPs feel really the chance of a no deal is growing with the clock ticking away. Or you might get blocks of MPs saying, look, we can attach an amendment about a second referendum to the whole thing and try and push it that way. But if she wins tonight, she's still got that hurdle.
Matthew, I don't want to be ageist, but this is a crisis without any great precedent in our lifetime. And I mean, the idea that we yet may just fall out of the European Union with catastrophic consequences seems to be becoming closer and closer.
Yes, I think we've faced catastrophic consequences before, and probably greater ones, but I've never experienced in my political lifetime circumstances in which nobody really knew what they were doing or what was going to happen. Even Suez, which I can just remember, the government was going the wrong way, but they knew which way they were going. There's a feeling now, people say to us journalists, you must know what's happening, tell us. I can't. I don't know what's happening. I only know one thing. that most people in Britain don't know, which is that nobody knows what is happening.
This is true even of the editor of The Spectator with a Conservative government in power. You wake up in the morning, and I'm the same, and Bronwyn is probably the same, you wake up in the morning and you say, what's going to happen today?
Well, that's right. I mean, what's going to happen at the end of next week? What's going to happen in 2 hours' time? We just don't know. But that's the thing about this. I mean, Brexit was not an idea cooked up there in Westminster. It was instructions given to people in Westminster by 17 million voters against the wishes of every leader of every party in there. So, of course, it was going to cause chaos. That's nature if you get a referendum result that goes contrary to the way the politicians wanted, but still trying to figure out what to do.
Let me just press you, because one of the things I woke up wondering was, perhaps none of the above, and if she doesn't do well, there's some youngster somewhere in the background, somebody in their late 30s, early 40s who will steam in, never forecast.
Well, yes, but where were they today? All we saw today were people from those Eurosceptic right of the Tory party. We didn't see any moderates saying, yes, it's time to join you. The optics were pretty bad. Now, the Tories do believe that cometh the hour, cometh the man. Not really, the hour is here, but there's no sign of the man.
You head the Institute for Government. Where is government tonight?
Well, government is trying to act like a government, but beginning with trying to work out who its Prime Minister is. And it is not doing an awful lot else about governing the country, apart from trying to sort out this mess.
In a way, failed?
Government has failed so far to craft a plan that Parliament wants to back. And we have a standoff at the moment between government and Parliament.
Give us a route out.
We have a zombie Prime Minister. She was a zombie Prime Minister before this vote. She'll be a zombie Prime Minister after the vote. The only route...
Poor thing, she's shown tremendous stamina.
Yes, terrific. But zombies do have tremendous stamina, but
you can't win.
They lack potency. No, we have to go back to the people. We have to say, you told us to leave the EU. Here's the plan. Do you like it? There's nothing undemocratic about that.
Alastair Campbell tried that on Nigel Farage tonight. And there was sort of blood and thunder coming out of Strasbourg.
Quelle surprise, yes.
But do you really think a second vote can be staged? I mean...
Yes. There is a deal, Theresa May's deal. We can offer that to people and say that's the only deal any British government seems to have been able to negotiate.
Hear this?
Yes.
There are a lot of people out there and a lot of anger. You saw Strasbourg. We don't want that here.
Well, one way to resolve anger is to have the fight out. Someone has to win this fight. This is not going to be resolved by a compromise in the middle, like Theresa May's deal. There are struggles where one side has to win, and this is one of them.
There was an awful lot of anger as well, people who voted for Brexit and don't think they're going to get it. If there were another referendum, I think Leave would win by a bigger margin, because it's not, people outside here, they're not the only ones with the voices right now. And remember, Parliament did vote for something. It voted for a no-deal Brexit. Unless it votes for something else, that's exactly what we're going to get at the end of March. So unless there is a plan, it'll go back to Plan A. And Plan A is that we leave on world trade terms in April.
Well, but if you had that choice, a no-deal Brexit and Remain, which would presumably be what you'd have to give to the people, could that vote be held?
Could the vote be held? Yeah, of course it could be held. And I imagine if there were the only two choices, you'd still get pretty much the same thing. The public are unlikely to say, OK, maybe it's a bit difficult, we're changing our minds. The polls show people haven't really changed their minds. We're still, after all the mess we've witnessed, the country is still pretty evenly split, which is a pretty remarkable thing. People who voted for Leave aren't thinking, this is a disaster, I'm changing my mind. They still want it.
How much midnight oil is the Institute for Government burning in trying to resolve within its own mind what could or should happen?
We're spending a lot of time on working out all the different options, and they almost multiply by the day. I mean, even, and then marrying the politics, with that, because you can map out different things that might happen under parliamentary process, but then you've got to put the politics into it as well, and say, can Parliament, for example, block a no deal? There seems at the moment to be a majority against no deal. That's one of the few things that MPs seem to say that they agree on, or many of them do, and yet there are, the process might allow a very determined Prime Minister to get a no deal through.
Now, Matthew, I have just heard from our correspondent who was in the corridor that outside the Prime Minister's room, that a number of MPs, Tory MPs, were in line at one stage during the voting to talk to her. Now, I don't know whether they needed persuading or whether they wanted a job, or, I mean, what happens on these occasions?
Well, I have never experienced a challenge to the leadership. Mrs. Thatcher was leader all the time I was there, and there was no challenge. There's all kinds of arm twisting. There's all kinds of persuasion, some of it legitimate, some of it illegitimate. I think if you want to be a Tory MP, you have to be prepared to be blackmailed, bribed, threatened in all kinds of ways. They won't be surprised.
Well, listen, can I thank all three of you very, very warmly for bearing the cold, both politically and weather-wise. Thank you. So let's now go straight back to Krish, who's in the House of Commons. Krishnan.
Thanks, John. Well, we are in that territory as we wait for the ballots to be counted and the result of having to ponder whether a win is a win. Now, I just bumped into the Conservative Party Deputy Chairman, James Cleverly. Now, he was a leaver who says no matter how slim the victory, the facts remain the same. That a leadership contest would take 6 weeks. It would lead to a delay in Brexit because Article 50 would have to be paused for a while, and all of that is highly undesirable. So as far as he's concerned, he'll take anything. Whether the rest of the party agrees with that is another matter. Michael Crick has been up there snooping around. Well, is a win a win?
Well, I mean, there are those on the May side who are saying, look, if she wins by one vote, that is a win. But if she wins by one vote, I mean, that means that she will have only got probably about 150, because there'll be a certain number of abstentions. 150 MPs is less than a quarter of the House of Commons. So what you're saying is that only a quarter of the House of Commons would have confidence in the Prime Minister. And certainly in times gone by, no Prime Minister could have survived on figures like that. I mean, remember, Neville Chamberlain lost even though he won the vote on Norway. Margaret Thatcher got more votes than Heseltine in 1990. She had to step down. John Major said that he needed 65% of the votes when he put his leadership on the line, and he got 66.3, and if there had been three fewer votes, he says he would have resigned. So this is a new rule, this idea that a win is a win by one vote.
Now, one of the things that struck me about Theresa May in the last few days is that she does seem to have this remarkable belief, self-belief, that she is the right thing for the country, that nobody else but her can do this. Now, you've known her since she was a student.
Well, Theresa May...
Where does this come from?
Theresa May is a very difficult woman to get to know. I think her parliamentary colleagues will tell you, and I don't think anybody can really claim to know her, apart from perhaps her husband, Philip. It's extraordinary, the way, the resilience, the way in which she's done hour after hour after hour at the dispatch box, hour after hour in negotiations. I think one of the things she's got going for her is that the polls actually suggest she's still quite popular with the British public, particularly with women who admire her stamina and her resilience and the way that she has just carried on in that way. And I think, if you look at all the alternatives to Mrs May amongst the contenders, none of them is particularly appetising in terms of public opinion polling. In times gone by, there's often been some big beast in the wings that the party can say to us, oh, if only he was leader or prime minister, we'd be so much better off. There isn't a figure like that in the wings right now. Certainly not Boris Johnson, who is not admired by the British public, nor indeed any of the other contenders. And that's one of the things that Theresa May has certainly got going for her.
Thank you, Michael. Well, we are expecting the result shortly. It shouldn't take long to count just over 300 ballots. Let's go outside to John.
Christian, thank you. You may think I've been joined by Anna Karenina, but I haven't.
It's her
the Conservative MP, Anna Soubry, arch Remainer. She's here with me. Thank you very much for joining us. And there are some of your allies down there.
Absolutely. The people's vote is there.
Right. Okay.
They're very good. They're good souls. Anyway.
But look, your party is not going to embrace a people's vote. Let's be candid. Well, they haven't yet, have they?
What is Theresa's way out of all this going to be? She'll survive
the vote.
Well, she'll survive the vote tonight.
Yes.
She's got to bring back her withdrawal agreement to the Commons for a vote.
She does rather well tonight.
She still has... Fine. Good. She still has to bring back her withdrawal agreement to Parliament. And the sooner she brings it back, the better. She can't keep kicking this can down the road. So she has to bring it back. She will lose. We know that. We know that the numbers are absolutely against her. then what does she do? Because going back to the EU, as she's begun to do, isn't going to change the terms of the withdrawal agreement, which will form the legislation, which in turn forms the treaty.
But we
so
heard
what is she going to do? What is her way out?
Well, we heard the wrath of Mr. Nigel Farage, and he, after all, started this ball rolling in the first place on the whole business of Brexit, and he was fire and brimstone on the whole idea of having another vote.
Mr. Farage, fire and brimstone outside Parliament, the man who wants to be a member of the elite, wants to be a member of the establishment, has never actually won an election to get into Parliament. So let's forget Mr. Farage. The question is over there in Parliament. She doesn't have the numbers, so what is she going to do? She can't just keep going on and on and on and chipping away at it, with the clock ticking, of course, to March the 29th. She has to have a plan B.
How many allies do you have? How many allies do you have singing the same song?
What is us?
Yes,
people
in
vote.
the Commons.
Oh, it's growing all the time. It's a private thing. A lot of people privately say it. They will exhaust all options. And then there is nowhere else for her to go. And rightly so. She should take it back to the people, as Alastair Campbell said, because I heard him, because I was here early. I heard what Alastair said, and he's absolutely right. The people have a right to a final say. Now they know what Brexit looks like. Put Remain on the paper, we'll do a proper job, we'll sell the EU, we'll talk about the causes of Brexit, and we'll have the solutions to some of those causes as well. And we'll make the positive case for us remaining in the European Union in that great reforming way. These things are all possible, because there is now no alternative, but in any event, it's the right thing to do. People are entitled to have a final say, especially the young ones.
Having said she's not going to run again, or suggested she won't run again next time, is she now a lame duck?
No, I don't think so at all. Theresa does have strengths and qualities. She wouldn't be our leader. People like me wouldn't have voted for her if we didn't think she didn't have those qualities and strengths. What she's got to do is she's got to listen to people, but most importantly, having listened to them, she's then got to change. We don't need a change of leader. We definitely need a change of direction. And that is... Theresa has now got quite a record for changing her mind. So it's absolutely conceivable that, faced with no other alternative, that she will take this matter back to the British people. In any event, as I say, it is the right thing to do. And I know that, John, people like you will say, well, hang on a moment, there's a lot of division in our society. That division is going to exist in any event. And, to be quite emotional about this, if we get this wrong, our children and our grandchildren will never, ever forgive us, especially when there is that alternative, which is the great deal that we currently have with the EU, the ability to put Brexit back to the British people and let them have that final say.
Anna Soubry, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, let's go up to the north of England, to our north of England correspondent, Claire Fallon, who is in Cullingworth Conservative Club in Shipley in rural West Yorkshire. Claire, what is the reaction to events here in Westminster?
Conservative
in your
Club this evening. This area has an MP who is about as Brexit as it comes. But in actual fact, in the referendum, this constituency only narrowly voted to leave the EU. So, let's have a chat to some of the locals who are here this evening. We've got Paul Sullivan. You're going to be standing to be a Tory councillor in the spring's elections.
That's right, yes.
And also Terry Kay, Secretary of the Conservative Club here.
Correct.
So, who are you with, broadly speaking? Are you with your local MP who wants Theresa May out? Or are you with Theresa May who thinks that you guys want them to get on with it?
No, well, shall I yeah, you can go, Terry.
We're with Philip Davis. I spoke with Philip Davis on Friday night. Paul and Philip was up here. We had a dinner, and I said to Philip, "Stand firm, mate, and carry on as you are doing."
So that means, presumably, that you want Theresa May out.
Yes.
Why? What has she done wrong? What should she have done better?
Well, she's done a whole lot of things wrong. First of all, she shouldn't have called the election. And then she stood on a manifesto that she seemed to produce all by herself, or Downing Street produced it. It wasn't the Conservative Party, it wasn't the, shall we say, the MPs who produced that manifesto. She produced it, and it attacked the core of the Conservative voters. With there were three things. There was the pension, the triple lock thing. There was the healthcare. and other bits and bats that affected even the winter fuel payment. All those things affected the core Tory voters, and so you don't attack your own people if you're going into an election, which she did.
But how much, I mean, it's interesting because you're bringing up a load of stuff that isn't about Brexit.
Yes.
So how much of the conversation in this club, how much of the conversation with people that you talk to is about Brexit, and how much is it actually about all of the other stuff that isn't necessarily being talked about in Westminster at the moment?
I don't know what they talk about down there. None of us can figure that out. Fundamentally, Theresa May, the Cabinet, a lot of the Conservative Party and most of the other parties are Remainers. They don't believe in leaving. So they've negotiated, either deliberately or deep down, they've negotiated sort of hanging on to staying into the European Union. So this deal, if it were to go through, is actually worse than being in. So I think we've come to the point now we have to up sticks, lock, stock and barrel. And if it means World Trade Organisation rules, it's actually quite marginal. The figures show that if there was a bad economic consequence, it wouldn't be as bad as the crash. And we've survived that.
A cliff edge Brexit,
No, I'm not saying, those are your words.
Right?
I'm not saying cliff edge, I'm saying World Trade Organisation rules. We managed to trade with China and America. They don't have jurisdiction over our courts, they don't tell us what to do. We do deals. With 65 million people, with the 5th largest economy in the world, people will want to do business. Now, I'm not saying there won't be bumps in the road, but the most important thing is not the economics, it's the politics, democracy. It's the Parliament now are like 19th century colonialists without the violence. It's we know best.
Just before we go, I think both of you want Theresa May out.
Yeah.
So who instead?
A leaver, someone who believes in Brexit.
But which one? Which leaver?
Oh.
Which MP?
I know that in the
Go on, give me a name because they're telling me to wrap up.
Boris Johnson is the most popular. He would win an election against Corbyn, whether any of the others would or not. But I'm interested in delivering a real Brexit.
Okay, thank you both very much for your time. Really interesting, really appreciated. So there we have it. Boris to replace Theresa May.
And thank you, Claire. Joining us now is Tory MP Andrea Jenkins, a member of the pro-Brexit European Research Group. Andrea Jenkins, let's just look forward from now because,
yes.
OK, we've had this vote and we think she's probably OK. But what has to happen now?
I think what we've seen, I mean, I've been on the Brexit committee since its inception the last 2.5 years, and it has been a disaster. You know, the government haven't prepared for every eventuality, you know, which is, in my books, is very irresponsible. And so I think the Prime Minister needs to start listening. I mean, in the 22 today, she actually said, you know, regarding Brexit, I will come back to MPs and I'll discuss it with them, I'll listen. But I thought to myself, well, she hasn't the last 2 years. There's been so many meetings. So I hope from this, whichever, you know, if she does stay on, that she'll start listening.
But the problem is that you, like the country, are totally divided.
But also the problem is we haven't approached this, you know, Brexit referendum result by putting our country first. Really, you know, let's not forget that we've got a trade deficit with the EU. You know, they trade more with us than we do them. We offered the £39 billion before even seeing the scope of what a deal could look like. So we haven't played our strong cards first. I mean, as a Brexiteer, I would like to see a deal. Of course I would. But I feel the deal that the Prime Minister's got, you know, I'd much rather remain in than have what she's got.
Is it just the Irish backstop or you want much more?
What I'd like to see, she must ditch the backstop. And also the £39 billion, you know, we're giving something for hardly anything at the moment, so I'd like to see us keeping hold of that. But I think it's a bigger issue than this. If the Prime Minister wins tonight, let's not forget that she's still not governing, really. We're still ungovernable because we've got a confidence supply agreement with the DUP, and they don't want her deal. So I think we're heading seriously into general election mode, and it's just a question of time, in all honesty.
Does she listen?
No.
Oh dear, that's terrible.
I mean, in the last 2.5 years, my colleagues and I from both sides, Brexit and Remain, we've actually, had meetings with both the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip, but it feels like it's fallen on deaf ears. Also, look at Owen Paterson, former Northern Ireland Secretary. He's come up with a solution to the backstop, and again, it's fallen on deaf ears. So if the Prime Minister does limp on today, she needs to start listening.
The trouble with his solution is he's a technology man, isn't he? He's sort of saying, well, the modern technology exists, but we don't see it working anywhere.
Well, he's done a lot of research into this, and I do trust Owen actually more than our Prime Minister at the moment.
But it might be easier if he could take us somewhere and we could look at it.
Yeah, well, there's the technology there which they can ramp up what we've got at the moment, but nobody wants a hard border, though. The EU doesn't want a hard border, Ireland doesn't, and we don't. So, why are we even talking about this, really?
Be honest, is this what you came into politics for?
Well, I came into politics after losing my dad. I started off at Greg's Bakery at 16. I never dreamt one day I'd be here in Parliament. But I came into, to fight for better healthcare. I've always been a Brexiteer. My departed dear father, he was as well. And when I resigned from government back in May with my ministerial aid position, I said I'll fight for Brexit. So that's what I'm going to do, John. I'm fighting for Brexit, and if Theresa May continues to bring this deal back, I will continue to vote it down. Like
Andrew Jenkins, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, John.
So let's go back to Krishnan there in the warmth of the central lobby.
Well, we're in a strange lull as we await the result, and it could come very soon. The press have all been invited into Committee Room 14 upstairs, where all this has been taking place, where the voting took place, where MPs had gathered to hear the arguments on either side of keeping or dumping Theresa May, and it's just a question of whether they're going to announce it before or after 9 o'clock. I mean, you'd have thought they've counted them by now. It shouldn't have taken that long. But the expectation is, especially if the Prime Minister has survived, that she will come out into Downing Street and make some sort of statement. So it will happen almost certainly in the next half hour. Let's go to Brussels now and talk to Matt, because of course, whatever happens, Matt, I mean, the truth is nothing factual in terms of the deal has changed. Theresa May is still in the position of having to extract some sort of change to the political declaration or to reassurances about the backstop from the European Union, and it hasn't been looking good, has it?
Well, as one senior EU official pointed out to me this morning, the best they can really do is take a yellow or pink marker pen and underline all the bits in the divorce deal that talk about the backstop. So, elucidation, clarification, but fundamentally no change. And that means that fundamentally the EU still will reserve the right, to end the backstop, if it should ever come to that. But on the other hand, there is a sort of, there's the political context. So if she prevails tonight, she will come back to Brussels tomorrow to a summit that was supposed to be about immigration, end of year fiscal issues, the Italian budget, and is now, tomorrow all about Brexit. She'll come back to this summit, if she prevails, with the kind of momentum that she hasn't had so far. And then you're in this sort of weird situation where the two universes of Westminster and Brussels collide once again, because she'll have that momentum. She might even get a standing ovation in the council convening in that kind of egg-shaped thing behind me. But at the same time, they will not fundamentally change the deal. You've got to understand, Christian, we're dealing with Michel Barnier. This is a French technocrat who went to the École Nationale d'Administration. He's the ultimate French Mandarin. He has spent 2 years honing down this 585-page document. It is enshrined in law. It has the backing of the EU. As far as they're concerned, it was signed off on. They're not going to open up that chest. They just don't do that kind of stuff. And you could argue that that inflexibility is part of the problem. But that is what we have at the moment. Now, of course, if she doesn't prevail, if it's someone else, then, well, then it's a whole completely different calculation. And as another EU official said to me this morning on the phone, off the record, our nightmare here is that the man with the blonde mop, as he called him, gets into number 10. That would be like having Donald Trump in number 10. That would be disastrous for us. And frankly, all the calculations so far would be off. I would, however, add briefly, Krish, that I think they really don't think here that a no-deal Brexit, even though they say they're preparing for it, is a real possibility anymore. And they're just wondering whether it's going to be May's deal by some miracle in the House of Commons, or indeed no Brexit. That is not something that they necessarily wish for, unlike the kind of thinking of most Brexiteers in the Tory party. But if it happens, then of course they're not going to make it go away.
But this is a game of brinkmanship at the end of the day, isn't it? Because if Theresa May does lose and a new character comes in and goes to Brussels to try and negotiate some sort of flexibility or difference to the backstop, the gamble that they're going to go with is that Europe will change its mind and doesn't want a no-deal scenario. So, I mean, what do people say behind the scenes about what would happen if there is a change of Prime Minister and it goes right up to the wire?
Well, here's a really interesting point. So just a few days ago, they hosted here at the European Union Armin Laschet. He's the Prime Minister of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. Now, in his state, there are lots of car manufacturers, lots of exporting industries on which Germany's economic wealth is based. He said to the crowd here that if there is a no-deal Brexit, if we fall off the cliff, it would be the equivalent of Lehman Brothers for German industry. Now, that's something that I've not heard so far, and my assumption had always been that actually German industry, which of course wants to sell stuff to the UK, would kind of knuckle up and file in behind Angela Merkel and accept that this is more a political project than an economic one. But I think we shouldn't underestimate that there is genuine nervousness in Germany, in France, even in Italy, and certainly here at the EU Commission, about what it means to fall off that cliff. But at the same time, they've not come to a position yet where they are prepared to make those fundamental compromises over the backstop, if this thing looks as if it's about to, go over the cliff. And frankly, everything else seems to indicate to them that it's heading away from the cliff, that the ERG might be sidelined, that Boris will never be Prime Minister, that at the end of the day, they're either dealing with no Brexit or some kind of deal, whether it's Norway or May's deal that's on the table.
Thanks, Matt. Well, let's go back outside. John.
So, Krishnan, what do you think this looks like from the outside world? Well, I've got somebody who specialises in the outside world, Cindy Yu, who works for The Spectator. She writes on foreign affairs, and particularly the view from China. But I'm really asking worldwide. I mean, in what does this look like?
Well, we know what the Europeans think of it. They have no time for this. The European Council is this week. Macron's got his own problems to deal with. So, having to go back and renegotiate some clarifications is not the right timing, and the Europeans are dead tired of it. But also, in China, Brexit itself was an enigma. It was a mystery why we chose to leave, rightly or wrongly. And now this leadership context is really actually making a lot of international observers have doubts in democracy. Is this what a democratic country should be like? Is this the right amount of turmoil, instability that really pushes a country forward?
But that's a very interesting question, which is exacerbated by what's happened in Italy, what's happened in Austria, in Hungary, in France. We're not alone. It's just that we express it in a different way. We've decided to Brexitize it.
I think the one key difference is that this is a political class. This instability fundamentally stems from the political class not being able to decide amongst themselves, first of all, what sort of Brexit they want, and secondly, what sort of leader they want. And then, the opposition not knowing how best to oust the leader, to oust the government.
But that's a really interesting question to ask, because one of the things that one suspects, having been on deck as a reporter for a long time, is that a lot of people are not going into politics who used to go in before. Where are they? Well, you go into the financial centres of the world, the rest of you find some of the greatest leadership you've ever met. No, really,
yeah.
But they don't want to go and serve their countries in politics.
And that's the curse of the public sector, when your private sector pays so well for exactly the same job, why not do that? But of course, what we're seeing now is decades of, as you say, this attraction to the private sector, to leadership there, and we're seeing reaping that harvest.
Most specifically, the challenge to Mrs May. How does that look?
I think it looks like, and I'm going to be hostage to fate here because I know we'll find out very, very soon, but it looks like she will win, even if it's on a narrow margin. And I think if she wins on a majority of one, she will still stay on. Politically, it's unlikely that she will resign.
Cindy Yu, thank you very much indeed. And we're going to hear pretty soon, I think we're talking 9 o'clock, but it could be a little earlier than that. We're expecting a speech, I think, from the chairman of the 1922 committee. But let's go over to Kathy outside number 10. Kathy.
Hi, John. Well, there's a little bit of movement here. You'll see that a microphone has appeared because we're being told to prepare for a prime ministerial statement. Not sure quite when it will come, sometime between 9 and 10. I mean, obviously she's going to want to get that statement out before the 10 o'clock news bulletins, but we're hoping she'll come out and talk to us while we're live on air now. Obviously, we don't know what the vote is going to look like. Lots of numbers being bandied about what she needs to get in order to secure her position. I mean, well over 200, she'd probably be pretty happy with that, and that would be a bit of a humiliation for some of her ERG opponents, like led by Jacob Rees-Mogg. So we don't know what the numbers are looking like. I think it's very significant what she said to MPs earlier, that she wouldn't look to lead them into another general election. There is still some controversy about how long she can stay on, and obviously
Kathy.
that will keep on coming up. That controversy will keep reviving as she struggles to get her deal, get concessions for her deal from Brussels, and then get her deal through Parliament.
Kathy, there is something which I'm very keen to ask you, because a lot of people have now been talking tonight about she needs to do this, she needs to do that, she needs to change this, change that, she needs above all to listen. Is she in fact going to be able to change in the way that many of her fellow MPs are asking?
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to Damien Green earlier, who's probably her oldest friend in Westminster, and I said to him, do you think privately she admits that she might have made mistakes? And he said, well, of course any Prime Minister would privately say that. But you also get the sense with her that he also said, in fact, that once she's decided on a course of action, she sticks to it. And that single-mindedness early on in her premiership was seen as something of an asset. Belatedly, of course, it's seen as something, tone deaf, too stubborn. You hear these words thrown about a lot. So I'm not sure whether she's going to be able to change course in the way that some of her critics would like. But certainly, if she does win tonight, I think she has been strengthened, and all of the wagons are circling to protect her and to say, right, okay. I think some MPs also tonight have somewhat looked into the abyss and seen what might happen if Theresa May doesn't get her deal or something very similar to her deal. People who don't want a second referendum because they don't want to open up all the divisions again, they've stared that in the face tonight. Similarly, no deal. Many people don't want a no deal. They fear the chaos that brings. And I think a lot of people who are quite critical in private of her, perhaps tonight, are thinking again about that.
Kathy, for the moment, thank you. Now, Krishnan, back in the central lobby, it's you.
John, I think it's looking pretty imminent. We just saw one very high-profile Brexiteer complaining to a cabinet minister who was lurking in the wings, clearly ready to come out and do interviews once they have announced the result, with the expectation that Theresa May has held on. And the Brexiteer was looking pretty grumpy and heard to complain that Theresa May's speech had been death, but not wanting to come on the television. So I think they are appearing to act as though they know that they have lost. But I think we will hear the announcement imminently because it can't have taken them that long to count. And so we will then be in the situation of trying to work out where we are at the end of this day, in which the vote of confidence was called very soon as the 48 letters had gone in. The whips clearly wanted this vote tonight because they didn't want time to organise the opposition against Theresa May, to start turning all the Leavers and second referendum supporters against her, and to start thinking, well, perhaps there is another way. And that, I think, is the really clinching factor here, that people who voted Remain at the last referendum and who are either soft Brexiteers, people who think that you've got to carry out the will of the people under the last referendum, and those people who are now calling for a second referendum, just felt that there was no candidate who could win. Because if they had to put two names to the party faithful, there would have to be a Brexiteer, and the great risk was that a Brexiteer would win the leadership, and then any chance of stopping Brexit or going into a second referendum scenario would recede. And at the moment, they feel, under the current situation, that there is wind in their sails. Because all said and done, the deal is still looking like it's in very, very difficult territory. Theresa May has a couple of weeks to try and talk to her European colleagues about what kind of reassurances she can get, but she will have to bring it back sooner or later, and there is still no suggestion that she has won any of the concessions that the Brexiteers and the DUP are demanding, which is effectively the end of the Northern Ireland backstop. So that deal is still looking very dicey, and she will have very few options between a hard Brexit that very few MPs want and going into a second referendum. So people are gathering. I think it's about to happen. But back to you for now while we wait for the result.
I like that word gathering. I like that word gathering. Krishnan, thank you for the moment. And I'm joined by Marcus Fish. He's a Eurosceptic, you won't mind me saying that. No. And you are on the other side of the equation, David Morris. Have your guys been seen off?
No, not at all. This was a really important thing for our country to try to get the right deal on the table. And in order to do that, you have to have the right leader and the right government to ask for the right thing.
Okay, one never does a thing like this.
Correct.
One never does a thing like this unless one is pretty sure of the right person to follow. Who would that be?
Look, what I've said is any of the senior Brexiteers would be much better. Well, I think any of Dominic Raab or Boris Johnson, or any of them would be great. David Davis, but yeah, that is for another day to think about.
But if that did happen, can you really imagine any of those names getting a majority of Tory MPs behind them?
I don't know is the reality of all of this, because what was very strange in the 22 was when the Prime Minister said that...
The 1922 committee, which is the
very sorry, yes.
Tory
I must be more, less jargonistic.
Less jargon.
And and what happened was she said that she was not going to lead us into the next election. Now, I don't think it's a foregone thing that she's won. I'd love to stand on television and say, oh yeah, she's walked it and all that, but I think that could have got another 20 people voting against her, because they think, well, if she's not going to lead us, why should we support her now? So I don't know what's going to happen. We will know very shortly what the result is, and then fun and games will start either way.
But I got the impression from you that you accepted the kind of it's...
Well, look, I've always said I don't know what the result is going to be. I think we need to wait and see what actually happens. This is a secret ballot. It's a notoriously unreliable electorate.
All right, well, let's just suppose for a moment your faction has won. What would your first act be once you've got the leader that you want, the Boris Johnson or whatever?
Well, we need to go back with the substitute Northern Ireland protocol that we set out today, which is a better approach to the withdrawal agreement, and on that basis then ask for the advanced free trade agreement that was offered back in March by Donald Tusk. That is the best way for sort of two independent jurisdictions to deal with each other while making their own laws, but interacting in an efficient and a friendly way.
But David Morris, the problem is Europe's fed up to the teeth with this and doesn't really want to do any more. They've sort of said, you've got what you've done and that's it.
You're right, and the backstop itself, it was in Article 50, so it should come as no surprise to anyone. But the reality is this, it's not just a backstop for Northern Ireland, it's keeping us all in the whole of the Union, all of us, even the UK where we are right now, will still be kept in. But think of it like this. The deal that we've got more or less devolves everything back to Westminster from Europe. So why would the Europeans want to keep us in? There's no point in doing that.
Well, but just hold on for a minute, because I can see now that we are looking at the committee room, somebody looking at his phone, but this is where you voted, right?
That is where we voted.
Now, it's entirely secret, or they can see you scribble.
Yeah. Well, no, they can't see.
They can't see?
They can't see us, no.
So, quite possible for someone to say they did vote for the Prime Minister and not.
Yes, and the other way around, no doubt.
Is this one of the tellers, or do you know who this chap is?
Can't recognise.
No, I can't either. Got a blue tie on though, so it might be in your part.
Thing.
Yeah. I see two blue ties here, a third waiting there. Oh,
I know who he is.
That's Michael Ellis.
Now, what does Michael Ellis do with his pink tie?
Hugh Merriman's got one too.
They look quite happy. What would their faction be?
I
Yours?
don't know. I don't
Hard
know.
to say.
Hard to say.
But it is an incredibly divided time. What's going to bring us together? What's going to bring you two together?
Well, we are together.
I know you are.
Good mates, actually. Very good mates, yeah.
You're good friends.
Yeah, we are.
But you are politically divided.
Well, we're not so far.
You're not going to brook.
We don't agree on this issue, but there's a huge amount more that we do agree on.
But this is a massive issue.
It is a massive issue, which is why we've had to take this move today, because unfortunately our experience of trying to get the government to listen to us over 2 years now has not been a happy one. So that would have to change. Whatever happens,
well, that's a very
we need to focus on the future and come together to do the right thing for the country.
You've used the word there, listen, which has been used in connection with Mrs May by a number of your fellow MPs now. She's got to listen.
Yeah.
Is that one of the problems?
I think the Prime Minister has been listening more intently recently. But the Prime Minister has gone to Europe. It's a business deal when all said and told. This is a business deal. And like in all business deals, negotiations, there's give and take on all sides. And it's how we actually get the right deal that's struck between both of us. Because, we want to still trade with Europe, we just don't want to be run by them. And that's predominantly what we're aiming for.
Is that what you're aiming for?
Well, it is, and unfortunately I don't think the withdrawal agreement nearly delivers that, because it keeps us in, gives all the leverage to the EU. It's a legally binding thing that we can't get out of. And
well, I respect and enjoy your friendship, but I'm worried about your divisions. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Krishnan, let's get back to you. Any sign of boxes or anything like that?
Welcome back to Central Lobby. The Committee Room 14 is filling up, and we very soon expect Graham Brady to come out and announce the results of the vote. Michael, what are you picking up?
Well, I think almost certainly Theresa May knows the result by now. I mean, they must have counted these votes by about 20 past 8. There's only 317 people voted, 3 piles of paper. In favour of May, against May, and abstentions. It shouldn't take long. But of course, if Mrs May was told sort of 20 past, 25 past, that does give Downing Street and her advisers an opportunity to respond.
Yeah.
And I think not long after we hear the result, we're likely to hear from her how she's going to react and what is the next step.
I mean, it's a bit like a bad general election result, even if she's won, isn't it? And that she's got to come out and try and reach out to the people who've just very openly attacked and opposed her.
Indeed, and by all it looks like there have been a lot of those. My own feeling is that this result could be rather worse than some people have been saying. Certainly, history would suggest that. Julian Smith, the Chief Whip, I'm told, has just arrived in the room upstairs, where all the journalists are gathered, probably 100 journalists, and gradually MPs are coming in there. It's a huge room, so there should be space for everyone, and we're told we get the result at 9 o'clock. I don't know why it's taking so long. Perhaps they're trying to demonstrate that if there was a full-blown leadership election, that would be a long, drawn-out process and would take forever.
And there's some choreography here, isn't there? Because the Transport Secretary standing behind us, ready to go on air along the line of cameras here as soon as it's announced. So they're getting their ducks in a row. I mean, not that he's a duck, but
well, some people might say, I better not be too rude about him. But and then, of course, we've got to do the quick calculations. How many people have been on each side? What percentage of that? How does that compare with last time? But what I was going to say earlier is that if you take the last sort of 3 occasions a bit like this, so when Margaret Thatcher deposed Edward Heath in 1975, when Michael Heseltine deposed Margaret Thatcher in 1990, and when the party deposed Ian Duncan Smith in 2003. On each occasion, the vote against the leadership surprised the commentators and the MPs. In other words, a lot of people hadn't revealed the fact they were going to vote against the leader. And of course, it is a secret ballot. And you will get cabinet ministers, you'll probably get some cabinet ministers who have voted against Theresa May today, even though they're all professing their loyalty. Got to be careful, though, because some of them might not get a job under another leader.
Okay. John, I gather you've got a guest with you.
Well, I'm now joined by 2 more MPs. They're both, I'm afraid, basically on the same side, I think we could say. Simon Clarke, who's even taller than I am, 6'7", And Bernard Jenkin, who is I think I could call you not an old campaign, but a seasoned campaigner.
A bit of a shorty compared to you two.
No. Well, now, here we are in a situation in which actually, when we expected there to be serious problems in the markets, with the pound plummeting and the rest of it, it hasn't happened. Why not, Bernard?
Well, I was in a studio just a couple of days ago, last week, when two analysts were saying that the UK market looks very cheap. It'll be a buying market in a few, after Brexit's over, the pound will rise and things will recover.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're going to the vote. Let's see. Let's go. A quick glass of water.
I don't think he's due to say anything until 9 o'clock.
Is he not due to say anything until 9 o'clock? But it is 9 o'clock.
Oh, well, he's getting the result out.
I think it's coming out of his pocket. It's not.
Can we hear it?
A hand has come out of the pocket, but not with anything in it. Well, they think it's very funny. This is very interesting. We're looking at the wallpaper. It's a kind of damask. There we go. It's out. It's out. There's the list.
Good evening, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the officers of the 1922 Committee for their help, especially my two assistant returning officers, Dame Cheryl Gillen and Charles Walker. The result of the ballot held this evening is that the parliamentary party does have confidence. Does have confidence in Theresa May as leader of the Conservative Party. The number of votes cast in favour of having confidence in Theresa May was 200 and against was 117. Under the rules set out in the constitution of the Conservative Party, no further confidence vote can take place for at least 12.
Numbers again, numbers. $200 for Theresa May, 117 for against her.
Well, that decides the issue of her leadership.
You've been seen off, Bernard Jenkin.
We wanted to give the party an opportunity to decide some very serious issues, and those issues are now on the table and are exactly the same as they were before today. And for 117 of my colleagues to express no confidence in the Prime Minister is quite a serious blow. Well, and it decides, we will all pledge our leadership to her, our loyalty to her, and wish her well. But the message is she's got to bring back a very, very substantial change in the deal in order that it gets through the House of Commons. And bear in mind, those improvements are not necessarily just for us. They're for her coalition partners as well. At the moment, she doesn't actually have the authority to govern in the House of Commons.
Simon Clarke, a resounding victory for the Prime Minister.
Well, I'm pleased for her, but the truth of the matter is as well, it does, as Bernard said, point to the fact there was a very substantial rebellion within the Tory ranks. The payroll vote is in the region of 140, so a clear majority of Conservative backbenchers did not vote confidence this evening, and that is a mark of real concern.
Let's cut to the quick. This occurred because of the deal she offered to the House. The House have not punished her for the deal. The House has, in fact, kept her as their Prime Minister. They clearly do see her as the agent of that deal, and that deal must go through.
I don't think that's right. I mean, the truth of the matter is, obviously, the deal will be revised. That was something that she talked about at length in the 22, and I really do sincerely hope that she is capable of bringing about the legally binding changes which are required. She was emphatic it will need to be more than just words.
You can't have legally bound changes unless you reopen the negotiations.
Well, that was the question I asked.
There are no renegotiations possible. Europe has said no.
Well, let's deal with what comes about rather than hypotheticals. But it has to be said, unless there are substantive legal changes to this deal, then I think it's very unlikely it will win support from either myself or a significant number of Conservative backbenchers.
Bernard, very briefly.
Well, part of the problem here is those of us that have been agitating for a clean Brexit, a clear Brexit, we represent the 52%, the majority of the population. Most of the Commons voted Remain. They don't represent the majority of this country, and there's been this constant tension between how the people voted and what the politicians want. And we're not going to let the politicians steal the result of the referendum from the British people.
Bernard Jenkin,
Thank you very much.
Thank you both very warmly. Krishnan, there you are in the lobby.
Thank you,
Hey,
John.
presto.
Well, with me, Michael Crick and James Heapy, Conservative MP. Michael, just what does it mean? It's a pretty big vote and no abstentions.
Well, I suspect it's enough for Theresa May to stay on, but it is not a good result. The magic thing is she's reached that 200 mark, which is incidentally one vote more than she got in the last ballot in the Conservative leadership election 2 years ago, when she got 199. But
so she's more popular than she was.
That's right. But then, of course, she's got the payroll vote and all the jobs that she's given out and so on. Percentage-wise, it's interesting, 63%. So more than a third of the party have voted against her. Margaret Thatcher stood down in 1990 when she only got 57%. So there's the comparison there. On the other hand, John Major, he got a bit more, and he got 66%. So 63%, only 200 MPs. It's probably enough to stay, but it's not a good result.
James Heapy, where does this leave your party? Totally divided? Total mess?
In a world where 52-48 qualifies as absolute victory, 67% seems like an absolutely barnstorming result. I think the Prime Minister has been...
I mean, this is a shameful day for your party, though, isn't it? It's embarrassing.
I would agree, absolutely.
Awful and,
Christian, on that we agree absolutely. I cannot believe that colleagues saw merit in asking the parliamentary party to do what has been done today. But we voted, the Prime Minister's got a result, and just as those who are members of the ERG have been saying to us that we must respect the result of the vote from 2 years ago, I hope that they will now respect the result of this vote, and that they will find a way of rallying around her so that we can move the whole Brexit process forward.
63% for, apparently, and 37% against, as far as the numbers are concerned. I mean, isn't the truth, though, that yes, she survived today, but she still has all the same problems, all the same parliamentary arithmetic, and she's been a little bit humiliated. I mean, winning tonight does not leave her boosted, it still leaves her damaged, because she's had open rebellion.
I'm not sure that you guys have seen anything from the result tonight that you weren't expecting, so I'm not sure that her position tonight is any different.
Europe,
from the, well, maybe, but that was the folly of the decision that the ERG and those that support them took in triggering this leadership election. But look, it's been done, the result has been had, and everybody surely knows, it was clear in the 22 meeting earlier on, that the only route forward from now is everybody stays in their trenches, nothing changes. The people are willing to now get out of their trenches, respect the result of the vote that's been had tonight, and actually try to find a common position around which we can all rally, then there's a route forward. If that doesn't happen, then this could be the first of a series of confidence votes, and the country will look on in utter dismay whilst we, frankly, let ourselves and our party down.
Although officially there can't be another Conservative Party confidence vote for another year now. So that is a gain for Theresa May. And we've had all this speculation for more than a year that there was going to be one of these confidence votes. It's now happened. It's now off the agenda for a year. When it comes to negotiating in Europe, sure, on the one hand, the people she's negotiating with will know that that she is sort of secure. On the other hand, they'll also be aware that more than a third of her parliamentary party have no confidence in her, and that will make them ask, well, is there any point in negotiating when she has lost so much of her party?
Just in a brief sentence, we've got to go, but I mean, are we closer, do you think, to another referendum?
I don't think so, because I think the parliamentary process that stands between tonight and a referendum is so enormous, and it took 348 days to get the EU withdrawal bill through this place. If you think a bill for a referendum would be any less contentious, then I think you're in cloud cuckoo land. But I do think tonight changes one key thing. The DUP can no longer assume that we're going to change our leader, and that, I think, makes for some very interesting conversations between the PM and the DUP in the days ahead.
Thank you both very much. John.
Thank you very much indeed, Krishnan. And I'm joined for our final pairing of the evening by the Solicitor General, Robert Buckland, and indeed from Anna Soubry, Anna Karenina, as I rudely suggested.
I wasn't. I think it's a compliment, actually.
We're delighted
Never mind.
I'm not delighted. Now, listen, let's just make sense of this. 63% she got. Is that a ringing endorsement?
No.
Robert Buckland?
Look, she's done well, but it's not brilliant. Let's be clear.
It's near to 2-1. I think it's a very clear endorsement. It's about the same vote that she got when she won the leadership, and we all said that was a pretty ringing endorsement. So I think she should be satisfied tonight that she's headed this off, and now she can get on with the job.
Look, she's seen off this ghastly bunch of right-wingers who have plagued the Conservative Party for far too long. I just want a leader that will actually sort these people out once and for good and boot them out of our party so we can be a proper centrist, sensible party. That's a long time away, I concede. But in the circumstances in which we are in, she should have done better. What Theresa now needs to do, because there are clearly people who have nothing to do with the ERG who have voted against this backdrop, that they don't have confidence in her. She's got to change tack. She's all well and good saying she listens to people. She's got to act on it. She's got to move considerably now, and she's got to bring this vote back. She'll lose it, but then she's got to come up with her plan B. And you know my views on what that is. It has to be that people's vote. There's no other way out of this. Nobody has a plan B, not even my good dear friend Robert Buckland. What will happen when she loses, as she will, again with the withdrawal agreement?
How much of that do you agree with, Robert Buckland?
I'm not in favour of a second referendum. It's time for Parliament to get on with the job. This is about representative government actually doing the job and fulfilling what was an exercise in direct democracy. It's for politicians of all colours to actually realise that the trust that's been placed in them and come together and get a deal for the country quickly.
But people have pleaded tonight for you lot to come together.
Well, many of us are together. Where we disagree is what do we now do? Because with much respect to my dear friend here, there is not going to be a majority for Theresa's deal. She can't renegotiate it. What is their plan B, with great respect? There isn't one. Get it back to the British people. It's the only way to solve this. Let us sell her deal. Let us make our case again about the positive side, the best deal, which is a membership of the European Union.
I think the British people want Parliament to do the job that we're paid to do and get on with it, and that's what the Prime Minister's had tonight.
Do you leave the proceedings tonight optimistically or a little gloomily?
I think I'm realistic that it's still quite a challenge, but...
optimistically or gloomily?
I just think that plan B is the only way forward, and it's the people's vote, and it's gone from the fringes right to the heart of the solution.
Thank you both very warmly, Robert Buckland, Anna Soubry.
Even though it's very cold.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. So tonight's news. Theresa May wins her no confidence vote. She needed to secure at least 159 votes. Now, the result declared a few minutes ago gave the Prime Minister 200 votes for her and 117 votes against her. This was how the result was announced by Graham Brady, chairman of the Conservative Backbench 1922 Committee, a few moments ago.
The number of votes cast in favour of having confidence in Theresa May was 200 and against was 117. Under the rules set out in the Constitution of the Conservative Party, no further confidence vote can take place for at least 2 hours.
Well, what a night. Only the coming days will tell us what it has told us and where it will lead us. But that is it from us here in Westminster. Good night.